To agenda item 1C, public.
Thank you, President Greenberg, Vice President Sanowski, and members of the governing board. We're pleased tonight to be joined by Dr. Kim Yaron and Dr. Cynthia Bachna to outline the initial review of our instructional time model proposal for board consideration. Dr. Yaron.
Thank you, Dr. Menzel. President Greenberg, Vice President Sanowski, governing board members, and guests, Dr. Bachna and I will present this evening a proposal for an instructional time model, and I will turn it over to Dr. Bachna to begin.
Thank you, Dr. Yaron. Should I see the slides?
Yes, there we go.
Thank you. You can go to the next slide. Thank you. So briefly, to give an overview of House Bill 2862, this allows for local education agencies such as SUSD to adopt instructional time models to provide flexibility in how instructional hour requirements are met. It allows us to meet hours through different modes of instruction, which we'll be talking about tonight. This does require a school district to receive approval from the governing board following at least 2 public hearings, of which tonight is the first hearing. So this bill allows for flexibility in instructional time models. Instruction can be provided in person or remotely. Instruction can be delivered through any combination of direct instruction or project-based, independent, or mastery-based learning. This bill allows for staggered times and schedules. Learning time can be during the evenings or on weekends, potentially. The one key part of this bill is that it requires 50% of the total instructional time on a campus to be in person. In order for us to allow for this model to be adopted in SUSD, there would be a need to be an attendance coding update that would be put into our student information system, which is Synergy. We would add a distance learning code, and it would be reported on a student-by-student basis. Students that are completing projects, participating in tutoring, working independently or in groups on assignments while assigned to home for quarantine, all would count towards distance learning. The law allows for up to 50% of time to be spent in distance learning, and this is calculated on a school-by-school basis. Any time over that 50% would result in a reduction in ADM. And with that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Yaron.
Thank you, Dr. Bachna. So what does this House bill mean for SUSD? Currently, when a student is home due to quarantine, COVID, or a COVID-like illness, they are marked absent, and the code is actually COVID absent. If this new model was adopted, we would then be able to mark a student distance learning present or participating, or distance learning absent, not participating. So a student who is home in quarantine could still be marked present when they're participating in their work, and that is work completion, working with the teacher. There's a variety of ways that they can engage, as Dr. Bachna shared. It can also include independent work. So if a classroom, a grade, or a school needs to return to virtual instruction, instead of marking that entire class, grade, or school absent or COVID absent, they would be marked distance learning, and their attendance would still count as present. So it's really important, particularly at the high school level. If a student is quarantined more than once, they could have up to 20 absences due to the quarantine. And so instead, they would be marked present distance learning, still engaging with learning. This is so important for course completion and also for our average daily membership, which is monitored by the ADE. So this gives us flexibility to respond to our current situation. We've already received some parent concerns about we take attendance very seriously and it's the right thing to do and we need to keep our child home, but all these absences are concerning. So this provides us flexibility in how we mark attendance and how we qualify learning. I want to next talk about the student support during quarantine. There has definitely been more students expected and asked to quarantine as deemed by the Maricopa County Department of Health for many reasons. So we understand that the Delta variant has more transmission rates, and with not everyone wearing masks in school, we've seen some increases, definite increases in the amount of students that need to quarantine. So in talking with teachers, we have expectations for meeting the learning of a student who is absent, which is really very similar to when a typical absence. And then we have recommendations and are really focused on supporting innovations in teaching, which we've seen over the last 18 months. So first, the expectation is, and this is true in any absence, that a student is provided access to the learning materials and provided support from the teacher. And that can look so many different ways in different grades and different subjects. The recommendation that we have is that teachers use platforms, virtual platforms, to make learning materials accessible for students that are at person and at home. So this happened so much last year that the materials were housed in Google Classroom. There's videos of lectures, assignments, materials, group projects, all housed in one place so that if a student has to unexpectedly quarantine, they know where to access materials and continue communicating with classmates and their teachers. Innovation. We have had an opportunity to innovate in the way we teach. So we have seen teachers turn on cameras for portions of the lesson, for the lecture part of the lesson, some direct key instruction. Sometimes a secondary teacher will teach 5 sections of algebra and will record core instruction from a lecture from first period, post it on the Google Classroom. If a student is in quarantine, they can watch that portion of the lecture. We also have teachers using Screencastify, which is when they create a video. Typically, they do it with slides that present the instruction, and you can hear the teacher's voice presenting the instruction. That is recorded and can be watched over and over again, either by in-person students that want to review or students who are at home due to illness or quarantine. So we are looking at using all these tools in our toolbox. I just recently heard from Karen Brown, our director of Gifted, that in one class, the students made a Screencastify together to summarize their learning. So the students were actually spending the last 5 minutes talking about what they learned, how they could articulate their learning, examples, and they were putting them all together and creating a video that they then posted. So the students and teachers together use technology to create this product that would be very helpful for anyone who was learning at home or a student that was in person and wanted review. So it's these innovations due to our current learning situation that we're seeing all across the district. So our technology coaches, our IT department, teaching and learning department, principals and teachers were all joining together to be very innovative in the way we support students if they're at home due to illness or quarantine. So this is our plan for a district, and we are offering additional support that I'd like to cover next. So in trying to be creative to provide additional layers of support for students that have an absence, we understand that a student that could be out for 5 to 10 days is not a typical amount of time. And frankly, it has been so difficult for students as we had all hoped that this would be over by now. So we're getting that fatigue with the situation. So we keep trying to be responsive and innovative to our current reality. And I met with several stakeholders and we brainstormed ways that could provide additional support. So what we've already started doing, specifically in 12 schools that have a larger, higher number of students in quarantine, we've provided them an opportunity to start with additional support A already. And so what's nice is we're already rolling that out. We're launching it district-wide on Monday, August 23rd. And what we're asking is that if a student is ill or quarantined, for that 2-week period, they would receive 6 hours of tutoring or additional support from either their classroom teacher or a teacher at the site that is able to do so. So for example, if I'm a 3rd grade student and I'm home due to quarantine, I would still use all the resources on the previous slide. Access to materials, additional supports the teacher is providing, all those technology innovations that could look different in different grade levels and in different classrooms. In addition to that, my teacher or a designee would have an opportunity to offer tutoring sessions before school, during the day when the students are in special areas or in an elective, and then after school. And so that would be a time that a teacher would meet virtually, and it could only be one student who's in quarantine, or it could be a small group if more students are. And they would provide that additional support during that tutoring session. So the teacher would be tutoring 3 times a week. Now, sometimes we're not going to be able to provide that. We might not be able to find a teacher or a designee because of scheduling or timing. So we're also partnering with Varsity Tutors, an outside tutoring agency that we used this summer. We had so many programs, so many summer school and enrichment programs that we simply couldn't fill all the need. So we partnered with an outside organization. And what's really neat about this organization is they schedule with parents. It can be a 1-hour, one-on-one session with a chemistry teacher, with a elementary reading teacher, with a Spanish teacher, or they have tutoring on demand. I like to call it Uber for tutoring, because you put in your subject and your grade level, and within 10 minutes, you're contacted with a tutor that you can meet with virtually. It's great for when your child gets stuck on homework. So that would be the elementary side. In secondary, we understand that they have multiple classes, particularly in high school. These are credit-bearing courses. And so we are focusing on English language arts, math, social studies, and science. So if each of those core teachers provides 3 hours of support, a high school and middle school student would receive up to 12 sessions of tutoring per week. And so they would get the schedule from each teacher. Now, if a teacher couldn't do it, it could be a designee. So if I'm an algebra teacher and I'm not able to provide that additional support, my algebra colleague teacher might decide to be the designee for any students I have in quarantine. If we're not able to make that work, we would offer the hours of varsity tutoring. So it is a robust level of support that we're rolling out, particularly at the secondary level, because we want to make sure we hit all the core classes. That would also be the case for content replacement classes. So if your student is in the gifted program and the gifted class replaces the reading class, or you're in a special education class and that replaces the math class or the reading class, that teacher would also be providing that support for you, in addition to early English language development. So now I'd like to offer it up for questions and discussion based on the learning model proposal, or how we are proposing supporting students when they're at home due to quarantine.
Thank you, Dr. Yaron. The first question is Beckman.
Thank you. Dr. Yaron, can you speak to the accommodations that will be given to our students with regard to due dates, turn-in times, quizzes, tests, etc.? Because while the tutoring is great, scheduling is difficult, and a child may have an assignment, a quiz, something that's due, but they don't get that tutoring time before it's actually due or supposed to be turned in. So what kind of latitude are we giving these kids?
That's a really important question, Board Member Beckman. So I met with principals, many principals today, and we're meeting in breakout sessions tomorrow. And then we are getting the subcommittee back together that focused on learning, and we're meeting on Monday. And so what we're going to do is really hone in on those expectations. And what we are focusing on is that we have flexibility, that we are making decisions with grace, that we may have students that are home ill. So we are going to be very flexible with due dates and expectations and assignments for students that are home due to quarantine or COVID-like illness or illness. Now, we're still going to have expectations because what we don't want to do is have a student fall behind. And what's great about the tutoring is if the student is coming back and still needs support, even though it's not during the quarantine, they can still participate in some of those tutoring sessions. We just have to make sure we set that up. Or they could still have more varsity tutoring sessions because maybe they couldn't take advantage of it then, they were ill or not able to participate at that time. So we're going to extend the support, and we're going to offer flexibility on due dates and assignments because we understand that this is a unique situation. So we will define that starting tomorrow in our breakout meetings because that would look different potentially for elementary, middle, or high school, but it's absolutely critical. The other thing we're also doing is agreed upon a final exam is only going to be a 10% weight instead of 20% weight. So it's less focus on a high stakes ending of the semester.
Okay, one follow-up comment to that. When you have these discussions, may I ask that you request that it is a universal response? And what I mean by that is you don't want one teacher allowing, one day to turn in something late in Spanish 2, and some other teacher teaching the same class, has a rule that it's 2 days, who knows, but it needs to be somewhat consistent. I know we've had issues with that before, and I would hear from parents that had multiple children or best friends or whatever, that one teacher was a lot more lenient than another, and they still need to run their classroom the way they run it, but we need to make sure that we're even-handed, please.
So I agree. So when we define the expectations, and we will decide, what we need to be really tight and completely systematic around, consistent throughout the district, and what would be teachers' discretion on other things. And then we'll publish those expectations and not only share them with staff, but also share them with parents. Because if we all have transparency in the expectations, that's going to help us move forward.
It will. Thank you.
Sure.
Board Member Vice President Sanowski.
Yes, thank you. Couple quick questions for you, if you don't mind answering these. I'm going to assume that our SUSD staff members will have priority over these tutor sessions before it goes off to varsity. Is that how I understood that?
Absolutely. Board Member Sanowski, Vice President Sanowski, our first choice is always our staff. What we can't do and don't want to do is make it a requirement. People already have commitments and schedules and really strenuous workloads already. We understand what a journey, a marathon this has been for our teachers. So the first choice is always that classroom teacher or subject teacher. Second choice would be a designee from that building subject area. And then if we just simply can't fill that, we have this other option of Varsity Tutors, which is a very high quality program. It's just that we would rather have our teachers do it, and of course have that extra opportunity for earning some ESSER dollars.
Is it possible that we could be working collaboratively within our complexes to also find a support pool there?
So we're starting with the building sites and specialty programs. We're definitely crossing from school to school, but this is a pretty major feat to get this up. I can imagine how many EPARs and time clocks, and it's a lot of moving parts to it. Pull something off district-wide this quickly. So that will come. We just want to make sure that we stand it up correctly, and then we can expand outside of buildings. We're already, in fact, doing that for some specialized classes.
Super. Thank you, Dr. Yaron. And then just to confirm, the ESSER funds will be covering and funding this assistance program to all of our students, correct?
Absolutely. It really is the intention of this ESSER funding is that we have new challenges because of our situation. And normally we would not have the opportunity to do this on such a large scale. So it really is a perfect match for the funding because it's directly supporting our students and it's providing teachers more time with their students.
Okay, you made me think of one more thing. If you would, will this also apply to our students that are on IEPs or individual education plans?
Absolutely.
Super. Thank you.
Sure.
Board Member Hartwells.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Yaron and Dr. Bachna. I just want to clarify with respect to the policy HB 2862, the legislation that was passed. So the proposal you have, the policy piece of it, is a request of the board to approve a reclassification of instructional modality in order to align with what HB 2862 requires. Is that a correct understanding?
I'm going to let Dr. Bachna answer that so I make sure we get the exact language on that. Dr. Bachna?
Yes, that's true. We are trying to, this allows us to have some flexibility and instructional time to allow for our students that are enrolled in the brick and mortar campuses to participate in remote learning.
Okay, but it's precipitated from HB 2862.
Correct.
Thank you. And then just to clarify another component, you in the first slide had indicated it was 50% of total instructional time must be in person. And then of course there's the penalty if that doesn't happen. Total means what? What does total mean? The whole school year, a semester, what?
The entire school year. They're still discussing if it's instructional hours, but we understand it to be 180 days. So looking at the entirety of the school year, not just a single semester.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
Board Member Lindsay.
Yeah. When was this plan put together?
In the past 2.5 weeks, I would say. In the beginning, we anticipated our quarantine numbers to be very low, similar to what they were last spring. And so the plan was for teachers to provide the materials and to provide the access, still using innovation, using our technology tools, really supporting that. So that had been in place. This additional support with the tutoring just came into fruition because we really understood the magnitude of the amount of students quarantining in the first week. That was really unexpected.
But not because of HB 2862.
No.
So
No.
This was the plan put together when we were going to mark kids' excused absence, correct?
That's absolutely correct. Absolutely.
Okay.
So it's really just really more in response to when a student is at home or if a class has to quarantine. The State Department of Ed is giving us latitude to still count it as learning.
Yeah, so we have the flexibility now through HB 2862, and we're carrying
Exactly.
the same plan. Okay.
Really separate from that, we originally had anticipated using our technology, using resources, using Google to provide access and provide support. This separate from the bill, this tutoring plan was just in response to the magnitude of the number of students having to quarantine.
Okay, and I was just under the impression we were going with a plan that wasn't the plan before HB 2862 was decided to go with. So thank you.
Do any other board members have any questions?
No.
I do not see any other question requests. Dr. Yaron, thank you for this presentation, and thank you for your team's work. I understand that you also consulted with various levels of staff, which I appreciate as well. Looking over the supporting our students during quarantine, the slides 6 and 7. So just so that I'm very clear here, the expectation and recommendation for K through 12 and then recommendation for 1st through 12 is that all learning materials are provided through the use of digital learning management systems so that all students will have access to that at home. Whether they're in quarantine or not, they could actually access that material, correct?
Yes.
And the innovation aspect is neither an expectation nor a recommendation. It is simply a statement that some of our staff, because we do have various technology models and ways of delivering instruction, may use some of those other methods. For example, streaming, screencastify, or recorded direct instruction.
Absolutely. So we are partnering with principals and with teachers to help them innovate to meet those needs. So we're seeing it in varying levels, but some creativity. So instead of defining everyone must do this, we're helping them use the tools to meet the expectation that students not only have access to materials, but they also have support.
I understand that when it comes to the use of technology, there are a number of different considerations that we have to go over. For example, you mentioned that some of our staff use a lecture model of education, or insofar as they're presenting a lesson to their students, there might be back and forth discussion, but that other classes, especially at the elementary levels, are just not formatted in that method. Was there any consideration given to requiring certain levels of streaming, or at least recorded lessons that can then be uploaded later in the day for some grade levels, but not?
So that has absolutely been a discussion, and any options and opportunities are still on the table. What we're doing right now is providing support for teachers to meet this need. And what we really found and learned last year is that there are some challenges of just sitting and listening. And like you said, with the cooperative learning, sometimes it's really hard to get that information. And instead, when you have some dedicated time with someone that is a teacher that is focused on you or a small group, that was really an effective way for students that were not at school to get the information. So that's why this small group tutoring or individual tutoring came about, because we think it could be a more impactful, effective way. We're never going to take anything off the table. If I've learned anything through all of this, is that our situation continually changes and frankly surprises me many times. I think we're over a hill and that's in our past, and something new happens. So our technology will continue to be a tool, and we will continue to pivot if we need to, and if we need to be more prescriptive in our requirements in meeting quarantine or students at home, we will. What's different about this is it's not 2 learning models at once. It's not running 2 learning models at once. This is not a permanent situation for a student. It's very challenging, and that's why we're taking the individual support, smaller group support approach, because it is shorter term. If we are not finding that that's effective, if we're not hearing from families that that's working, if our staff is not able to do that in significant numbers, then we will absolutely look at Plan B.
Do we have an idea of how many members of staff intend to use some of the technology we've given, or that is available to them? And the reason I think I ask about this is not just about short-term quarantine, because the hope is obviously COVID will be behind us, hopefully in the near future, but the long term as well. Some of those discussions did focus around where there are the lecture style classes that teachers may be able to upload those so that students who are homesick in the future can watch them, or if they need to study or go back something they missed about that class. Do we have an idea of how many members of staff are interested in doing that?
There are so many, there's entire grade levels that are having one person tape a lecture and they upload it on all the Google channels. There's others that are, like I said, doing the Screencastify. Others are meeting with students virtually, just as an additional layer of support because they really haven't been able to do that before. We're having attendance at meetings increase, particularly IEP meetings or meetings with parents, because when they couldn't come in before, because we have all this technology, they're able to participate. We're going to explore teachers watching master teachers teach a lesson by being able to watch into the classroom, where before they would have had to come and sit in the back. So we're not going to unlearn these skills or stop using these tools. And it is exciting to me as an educator to see all the innovations that are happening. We would have to do some digging deep and surveying to see who is using what tool, and we absolutely could do that. I did a lot of pulse checking with principals today, and it just varies by being comfortable, the skill level, the type of class they have. In an interactive class, such as physical education, it's much harder to make it work. So it really does vary by building and vary by classroom, subject, and grade area. But we absolutely can go in and find, do some surveying and tabulating on who is using what.
Thank you, Dr. Yaron. I appreciate you answering those questions. We do have a lot of parents and members in our community, as well as board members, who, note that we did make a substantial investment in those technological capabilities. So I just wanted to know the factors as to why not everyone can live stream, or capture their lectures, as well as kind of what we are using that technology for, both for quarantine students and on the day-to-day basis. That's the end of my questions, but I see we have a few more from board members. Board member Beckman.
Yeah, you may have touched on this, but can you reiterate, how are you differentiating this instructional time for students that parents don't call in, or it's not really deemed an excused absence?
So, Dr. Bachman, do you want to address that?
Could you elaborate on that or explain a little bit further? I'm not sure I understood.
I had a community member say she was just curious. It was an educator actually curious about how that there may be some people that are not calling their kids in, i.e. so that they're not reporting exactly what's going on. The kids just aren't showing up, so it's not necessarily excused. So is there any differentiation between allowing those kids access to all this support if the absence is unexcused?
Oh, okay. Now I can answer that now. Thank you. And then, of course, Dr. Bachna jump in. So this support is for students that have been asked to quarantine, are staying home ill due to COVID, or a COVID-like illness. So that would be noted in Synergy. So a student that is absent is not going to be able to just jump onto the tutoring session. We certainly want to be inclusive and as flexible as possible. But if 25 students all show up, this is supposed to be a specialized opportunity for the student who is at home, who's missing learning. So we're trying to make it smaller and focused. So teachers will be using Microsoft Teams with a waiting room. They will communicate specifically to the family. These are the hours I'm offering tutoring, or this is the my designee is offering the tutoring, or this is the contact information for Varsity Tutoring. I also failed to mention that Varsity Tutors will be on Clever. So when students are looking at their single sign-on and they see, all the little boxes, there will be one for Varsity Tutoring. And if that is their chosen support, the hours will populate in their app, and they will be able to facilitate that rather easily. So we're excited about the ease in which families could access that if in fact they need to use that tutoring.
Thank you.
Are there any further board member questions at this time? If there no additional questions, the board will move to agenda item 1D, public comments. The public will be provided with an opportunity to speak by telephone by calling the number 480-484-7873. Again, that number is 480-484-7873. Public comments will be limited to 3 minutes per speaker and are limited to discussion solely on the matter of our first read of the instructional time model for 2021-2022 in accordance with House Bill 2862. Speakers may not talk about any other matters that the board will be discussing tonight or not discussing tonight, only the first read of the instructional time model, and we will cut off speakers if they go off topic. With that said, we will move to the first speaker. If I could be sent the first name. Our first speaker will be Carol Wacker.
Carol should be there now, yeah.
Hello.
Hi, Carol. You have 3 minutes to discuss the first read of the instructional time model.
The instructional time model works for me. I agree that students should have additional support, and using an outside tutoring company makes me happy because the teachers are already overwhelmed.
Thank you. We will now move to our next speaker. Our next speaker will be Daniel Ray. We will move to our next speaker, Ms. Sarah Solom. Ms. Solom, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
You have 3 minutes to discuss the first read of the instructional time model.
Good evening, board members and Superintendent Menzel. Thank you for allowing public comment this evening to hear the important perspectives of your constituents. My name is Sarah Solom, and I am a mom of 3 and an SUSD parent. I'd like to review the SUSD communications from May 14th, 2001 to today. May 14th, SUSD sent its first notification that math would be optional for the 2021-22 academic year. Superintendent Menzel said regarding math that it is my hope that we can respect their choices as individuals when discussing math being optional.
As a reminder to our speakers tonight, again, public comment is limited to the first read of instructional time model for 2021-2022. The next speaker, Mr. John Adams.
Yeah, I would just like to say tonight that it's disappointing the way this whole thing's being handled, and that I don't understand why we are not utilizing the cameras that we spent millions of dollars on to live stream the classes so that the kids can watch it whether they're at home or not. Thanks. Have a good night.
Thank you. Our next speaker will be Jamie Gil Santos. Do we have any further public comments on the matter of first reading of the instructional time model for 2021-2022? We do. Our next speaker will be Kristen Markson. Mr. Markson, are you there? Or Ms. Markson, are you there?
I am.
Hi, you have 3 minutes to discuss the first read of the instructional time model for 2021-2022.
Hello, I'm the mother of a student who was already quarantined. She was a close contact of a vaccinated, masked student who became infected with COVID 5 days into the school year. I'm really heartened to hear that the board and the district have a plan for children in quarantine like my daughter. Unfortunately, we have not enjoyed any of the benefits discussed today. She's had no support. We've just been at home trying to make do with what we can find on Google Classroom. This has been a really awful start to the year, and I see it directly as the responsibility of this board and district leadership to appropriately plan for the new dynamics necessitated by the Delta variant. So I very much support the efforts today to do that. And I hope that the board will remember that the #1 goal here is to keep children out of quarantine by keeping them safe, masked, and safe from COVID in the classrooms. That's going to be the best way to avoid having to use these supports. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Our next speaker will be Dan Curtin. Mr. Curtin, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
You have 3 minutes to discuss the first read of the instructional time model for 2021-2022.
Okay. The first read of the instructional time model is all that we're allowed to make comment on, which is really sort of shady. I'm kind of surprised. Well, actually, I'm not surprised that this meeting is not only online because the board won't face parents that are upset about everything that's going on, especially about the first read, yada, yada, yada. But again, this is Dan Curtin, and I just can't believe that the board is going through this whole thing again. Here we go again. You said that you're trying to be creative and figure out how to help the students. You can help the students by having normal school. All the things that you're doing, all this mitigation, whatever, it doesn't work. We've been through this. And parents have the right to make healthcare choices for their kids. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker will be Amanda Ray. Ms. Ray, are you there?
Yes, I am.
You have 3 minutes to discuss the first read of the instructional time model for 2021-2022.
SUSD talks a lot about equity and inclusion. We hear these words repeatedly. Sadly, SUSD policy and protocols are anything but equitable and further disadvantage so many families and students. Last year, 2 of our North Scottsdale K-8 schools reopened for full-day learning, while the other K-8 schools stayed on half-day schedules. Once again, we have another inequitable policy with the handling of close contact quarantining of healthy students. Under the same policy, students by no fault of their own were sent home last year as many as 5 times, missing dozens of days of in-person instruction. Students privileged to have 2 parents at home and access to technology were able to keep up, while others with less than ideal home situations fell behind. Not all families in Scottsdale have the resources to support learning during repeated quarantines. Some will have their jobs threatened when they are forced to miss work. Put yourself in the shoes of a 5th grader with a single mom who works 2 jobs to put food on the table. Now imagine that you are now the reason she can't go to work and eventually loses her job because she must stay home with you while you wait out your quarantine. How does this make a student feel included? Testing allows you to return early, except it's almost impossible to find free testing right now. So students whose families can't afford to pay for testing go back, while those families who can't wait out their sentences. You then have to explain to your classmates that your family can't afford to test, or you make up a story to spare yourself the embarrassment. I wasn't born wealthy. If COVID had occurred in 1988, as the daughter of a registered nurse, I would have been left alone to fend for myself at the age of 10 while caring for my 6-year-old brother. Perhaps my district would have justified it that it was okay as long as I had a list of assignments. If I had been in high school, I would have opted for a GED and found a way to help support my family when I was deprived of an education. Thankfully, an equitable education allowed me to escape poverty. As adults, we have already asked too much of our children. We've complied with the promise that if we just do this or that, we can all go back to normal. But the goalposts keep moving. Where is the off-ramp? Masking our children with 0 cases is unreasonable. Putting masks back on our children and sentencing them to repeated quarantines is child abuse. We won't be able to measure those effects for years to come, but
Thank you. As a reminder, the discussion tonight is about the first read of the instructional time model for 2021-2022. Our next speaker will be Jeff Steven.
All right. Hopefully you guys can hear me okay. The audio was a little bit sketchy going through YouTube. I've read HB 2862 3 times today, all 24 pages, and I appreciate the 2 doctors that were speaking on their viewpoint of what they've done so far. One of the doctors, the lady with the blonde hair and navy blue shirt, about 3 minutes into her presentation, she said the benefits of the online learning that she's working on would be helpful because children are not wearing masks, are creating more cases. I would like to correct the doctor and state that the reason why we're having an increase in cases is because so many people have taken the poisonous mRNA vaccines. It's creating these new variants. So it's not the unmasked children, it is variants created.
As a reminder, the public hearing tonight is on the first read of the instructional time model for 2021-2022. Our next speaker is John Shear.
Hear me?
We can. You have 3 minutes to discuss the first read of the instructional time model for 2021-2022.
Great, thank you. So I guess I just want to take the time. I'm a father of 4 at Cherokee Elementary. It is so disappointing to hear you guys continue to put forth pathetic excuses of plans that don't service and develop our children. You know, you talk about 50% of the time in school is being acceptable according to this new law. It's unacceptable. You guys continue to plan all of these, plan around all, and I'm sorry that this is going to be a little distracted because I plan on speaking about something else, obviously. But since you guys have decided to be less than forthright in the way that you've run this and prevent people from speaking their mind and actually speaking the truth about what's going on, I'm forced to sit here and talk about something that I think is obviously an absolute joke, but is not the focus of this meeting. And you guys are well aware of that, yet you continue to put up this sham in front of us. This learning model that you presented is not good enough. We have children sitting on a quarantine that are perfectly healthy, that outside of school are playing with other kids that are in school, but they're not allowed to go back. They don't have support at home. Their parents, you talk about teachers are heroes. I get it. Teachers are great. But what about the parents that have been in the background doing everything for all of these kids, running back and forth, quitting their jobs, getting new jobs, staying home? Where's the support for them? Okay, that's great. The teachers are going to have additional support for tutoring. How about the parents that are now forced to stay home for an additional 2 weeks because their healthy child is stuck at home? It's absolutely insane. It's a mockery of our educational system, and you guys should be embarrassed of yourselves for even presenting this to us. How much more time do I have?
1 minute.
I want to make sure I utilize it all. Great. Let's see what else. So are you guys, so I believe that, does the plan, I mean, I guess, I don't know if you guys can respond to this, but I'll just go forward anyway. I assume the plan has some sort of compensation for tutoring for the teachers because, you know, they're going to be doing extra work. Will you be doing any compensation for parents that are missing work from home that will be doing your job for you, by teaching their own kids instead of the public education system. Kids are being forced home unnecessarily. Now their parents are forced to leave work, miss pay, which is creating even more financial struggles and stress, causing homes divided because of all of this disaster that could have been completely 100% avoidable. You leave kids in school, you let them learn, you quit nonsensical quarantine. Thank you for your time. You guys are pathetic excuses.
Thank you. Emmy Cardella will be our next speaker.
Hi, can you hear me?
We can. You have 3 minutes to discuss the first read of the instructional time model for the 2021-2022 school year.
Thank you. Thank you for holding this meeting tonight. I wanted to speak on behalf of myself and my husband, Marty Cardella. My name is Emmy Cardella. We have 3 kids in the school district. And I just wanted to thank Dr. Yaron and her team for the work on this. I thank you for being flexible. Nothing's going to be a perfect solution, but I know how difficult it is to come up with these solutions. So thank you for offering the supports that you are to our students, and here's hoping for a better rest of the year. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker will be Kendra Shear.
Hello.
Hi, Kendra. You have 3 minutes to discuss the first read of the instructional time model for 2021-2022.
Good evening. I am a concerned parent of 4 within SUSD, and I am here to discuss the first read of the instructional model. And I feel that you're not doing right by anyone. You're not doing right by the teachers, by the parents, and certainly not by the students. These learning model strategies are not only not serving their purpose, but they're ultimately causing far more problems than they are causing solutions. As has been shown, these children are not being quarantined because of what is happening at school. They're being quarantined because positive cases are rising outside in their daily lives, which will not change regardless of how much you make them mask or how often you make them quarantine. These children will continue to live their lives, and then we will continue to get quarantined. And what you force upon them at school won't change this. But what will change is the attitudes and atmospheres. And please don't underestimate what a huge impact that has on these children. I've talked to so many people at schools throughout the district, and the climate is hostile at best. These children deserve better than angry parents, angry teachers, angry staff, and angry students. We went 10 days in school where everyone got to choose what was best for themselves and their families, and it went well. Masked and unmasked were coexisting peacefully, and the children were happy. We had multiple events at our school where large groups of
As a reminder, the discussion tonight is limited to first read of the instructional time model for the 2021-2022 year. Our next speaker will be Stacy R. Stacy, are you there?
Yes, sorry, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. You have 3 minutes to discuss the first read of the instructional time model for 2021-2022.
Thank you. Thank you to Dr. Yaron for her and the team's work. Our kids and community requires you to be thoughtful and courageous leaders. I'm a parent of 2 elementary kids who are just starting their public school education experience. With respect to this instructional model, it's a challenge for everyone, especially our very youngest and their teachers, because they are not yet integrated in school or learning. It's nearly impossible for children who are sick and unable to engage in learning during quarantine, as well as for single parents and most any working 2-parent family. There is no doubt that these kids deserve to be in school, in-person learning. I ask you to consider providing parents resources to support the model. as a voter, parent, and community member. I hope that the governor's Education Plus Up announcement today of additional funding will not impact your decision, and that we can uphold our support for students for this quarantine instructional model and for all of their learning opportunities. When we look back at this moment, our kids just want us grown-ups to be able to say we did everything possible to keep them in school, safe, healthy, and learning. Thank you.
Thank you. My apologies on the pronunciation, but I believe our next speaker will be Hakelin Baker Oldfield. Is there, again, I apologize for the pronunciation, but Hakelin Baker Oldfield? Okay, we will move on to the next speaker, Trish Olson. Trish Olson, are you there? There seems to be a little bit of technical difficulty, so we're just going to give our IT team a couple minutes here to sort that out.
Hello?
Hi, who may I ask is speaking?
This is Trish Olson.
Hi, Trish. You have 3 minutes for your first read of the instructional time model for 2021-2022.
Okay. My name is Trish Olson. I have 3 children in the SUSD district, 2 in middle school, 1 in high school. As parents, we want transparency in all school-related topics, including the instructional time model for the 2021-2022 school year. We want to know that when you say something at a board meeting or send something out to families of this district, even if it's something that some people won't agree with, that you mean it. Provides parents all the information they need to make decisions about where their children will be attending school. I often say to my children that if you say you're going to do something, do it. And that's my message to you tonight. The messaging coming from SUSD isn't always as clear and concise as it should be, nor does it come in time for families to decide if SUSD is the best fit for them. We need to be able to trust district leaders to follow through with their commitments. We need to be able to trust that SUSD has our children's best interests at heart, and that the students are at the forefront of all of the decisions being made by the district. I had to shift my comments slightly just to include the instructional time model for the 2021-2022 school year. So I will say in that context, it's interesting that you're looking to adopt an instructional model from a House bill that isn't in effect until September 29th. That is puzzling. And I guess my question as a parent is, it feels that these ridiculous quarantines are putting kids at a disadvantage with no instructional time coming from the teachers. And that is frustrating as a parent of 2 middle schoolers and 1 high schooler at a time when their education is so important and so vital. Please understand the need for transparency for parents and caregivers does not change because of a pandemic. It's vital to maintaining a good working relationship between all stakeholders of this district. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next speaker will be Jesse Torres. Jesse, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Jesse, you have 3 minutes to discuss the first read of the instructional time model for 2021-2022.
Thank you. So first off, my name is Jesse Torres. I am a special education teacher here in the Scottsdale district, and I have been in the district for 7 years, all in special education. So I just want to say, first of all, thank you to you guys for taking public comment. And in going over that learning model, I did hear, I believe it was board member Lindsay, who had questions about, you know, accommodations and things that are being done for students in special education. And I must say that I am very concerned because often, you know, not just teachers, but other, you know, upper level admin, parents, we forget that not all special education students are simply resource students who may need additional help in reading or writing. I work in self-contained, and therefore my students have immense needs. And at this time, you know, last year, aside being a complete mess, we did everything we could, and I did everything I could as a teacher to provide them with what they needed. However, this year, I feel like we went into it a little bit blindly, and I am just concerned about what is available through the special education department, through the district. What are we doing other than homebound instruction? Because right now I have a student who she is immunocompromised, and unfortunately she's only being offered up to 4 hours a week, which is simply not enough. And again, that does require a teacher to come to her home, which additionally for a medically compromised student is a danger at this time. So I just want to make sure that in this instructional model that we can be as specific as possible and really loop in those self-contained special ed programs who have been, I feel like, often left behind because these students just have needs that are extremely difficult to meet. And as much as I would love each and every one of them to be at school, and I will do everything that I can to provide them with that instruction, I know I'm going to get cut off for this, but we need to implement masks in at least elementary, if not special education, so I can protect those students. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Jason Barone.
Hello.
Hi, Jason. You have 3 minutes to discuss the instructional time model for the 2021-2022 school year.
Great, thanks. So my name is Jason Barone. My wife Sue and I have 2 children in SUSD. And what I'd like to discuss about the instructional time model, first and foremost, kind of to echo what Tricia talked about earlier, I'm dismayed at the fact that for the second year in a row and the third school year disrupted now in a row for these children, which is tragic in its own right. It seems like we've been caught off guard as a district and as a board, and we are adopting something on the fly that wasn't laid out in advance of the school year. So that is first and foremost. In terms of, I was also dismayed by Dr. Guerin's enthusiasm and excitement for a plan that doesn't allow for our kids to get in-person education. I can appreciate the willingness to innovate, but nothing takes the place of in-person education. These kids are not learning. Nothing in the plan is addressing the AZ merit standards and what standards they were previously held to before this horrendous situation began. My daughter is already quarantined now, and as other parents have said, has lost 4% of her education in-person class time this year, right out of the gate, second week in, and really is fending for herself right now because there was no plan, and not apparent that plan won't be accessible for her time on quarantine. But unfortunately, she'll probably get an opportunity to, adopt and leverage some of these new services at some point. I am amazed that as she sits here healthy, going on with her life and her activities and soccer and so forth, she's still getting no education that she critically needs as she's a freshman now in high school. The goal should be to have kids in-person learning, optionally masked, and held to the standards that were always in place and put forth by the state before we put all of that on hiatus for this situation that, you know, continues to plague us month to month. That started on 15 days and now we're 18 months in. So the board needs to prioritize in-person education. Kids, people who are uncomfortable with that should go to Seoul, and that's the way we should proceed as a district. We are losing to private and charter schools each and every day who are finding more effective ways to keep the kids in person and educated properly. Thanks for your time.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Ron Donnelly.
Yes, I'm here.
Ron, you have 3 minutes to discuss the first read of the instructional time model for 2021-2022.
All right, great. Yeah, I'm a parent of two children in the Scottsdale School District, one at Ingleside and one at Arcadia. I think at first glance of the instructional, plan, I, commend the teachers that again are being asked to provide, Herculean list to, a variety of courses and classes, labs, hands-on activity, presentations, all of the learning and education that goes on that is not specifically, reading, writing, and arithmetic that, are very, digitally based. So I really applaud their effort. My questions really kind of fall that one of my children already received a COVID letter. So while I appreciate these thoughts and ideas are being recommended, I have already reached out to the teachers, and it does not appear that the teachers are aware of these plans or other programs, as only one teacher had replied, and they were kind of unaware but very supportive of helping my child kind of with the effort. And so that's kind of my first question is, when will this plan go in effect, and will students kind of receive a, here are the teachers, here are the activities for each of those teachers, and how are they moving forward? And then the second, as this may become a revolving kind of quarantine effort throughout the school year, in the future, will a plan kind of come along with the quarantine so students aren't continually trying to then reach out to all of their teachers individually and figure out, the individual teachers' kind of COVID plan as they move forward, just to make sure that there, kind of is, a fluid transition, as I know some of the, previous year has had, students in 4 and 5 times in quarantine, which, is a significant amount of time. That is all I have. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Stephen Martzola.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Here?
Yep, I'm here.
You have 3 minutes to discuss the first read of the instructional time model for 2021-2022.
Awesome. Thank you guys very much. I just want to thank you also for allowing comment. Obviously, talking it over is the best course of action with anything. The first thing I just want to bring up, because I'm a numbers person, I have a son that's in 2nd grade, and we did the online stuff the last year and a half. And the numbers broke down to about 35 minutes a day. It seems like that's what this policy is going to be, 3 hours a week, 180 minutes, that's 35 minutes a day. So my questions and comments would be, when it was 50% of time away and at school, days is a very broad way to define that when it's 180 minutes a week when school is 6 hours a day. We dealt with that the last year and a half, and there's been incredible setbacks. So that would be the first concern. The second concern would be how are you guys going to do with internet connections? Because Microsoft Teams was horrid for connections. I mean, we pay what, $150 a month for Cox, and we still get disconnected, and we only have internet connection, $150 a month. So you can imagine what plan we have. The next thing would just be one-on-one help, because once again, the 35 minutes a day last year online just really wasn't cutting it. They have one lesson, and the parents are teaching them for the next 3 hours. And if you have younger kids, you know, they want to be at school, so they're angry at their parents that they have to be at home, and they don't want their parents to teach them because they're at home. So, you know, that would be another thing I would like to bring up. The other question would just be, what is the cost that that the school will be paying to Varsity Tutoring? Is that something that's already been worked out? Are you going to pay the same cost as the teachers that you'd pay them? Just financially, what is that looking like? And then if it is through Varsity Tutoring, are they going to know the classwork that they're doing at that time? You know, things like that. But a main concern is internet connection, because if you guys only set up one time a day for the teachers to do this, and you get disconnected through it, which happened numerously during speech and other classes that my son took. So that would be the biggest concern that I would have with that, is that we even had technical difficulties during this meeting, and you guys, you know, I assume have much better capabilities than I, and a tech team. So, you know, that would be my major concerns along the way. Obviously, this is a difficult time, and I give my prayers for all the parents that are dealing with this. I mean, it's heartbreaking to hear this for everyone, the teachers, parents, you guys. I mean, this is not a fun situation. But I do hope that you guys open up more, because just when you guys said, like, you guys might not be having a meeting or might not be having a vote, or you might have a vote later on, obviously that makes people not trust you guys. So my thing would just be, obviously, just try to open up. But thank you guys. Have a great night.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Corrine Warner.
Hi.
Hi.
Can you hear me?
We can, and you have 3 minutes to discuss the first read of the instructional time model for 2021-2022.
Thank you. This is Sherry. Your model is not going to work for our children. I say it because we already tried it. You should know by now that our children need in-school, not in-person, in-school instruction. You're causing our children to regress dramatically. You're making decisions that you may believe are science supported, but they're not. Our schools cannot cause mental, physiological, social, psychological, and academic delays to our precious children any longer. We have had enough. Do you ever wonder how these kids feel quarantining at home just for being around their friends? What is your purpose, if not to actually educate our children instead of making up the rules as you go? Have you ever looked in the eyes of a mother who lost her child for suicide? I encourage you to do so, because it might remind you that your instructional plan is a plan to drive children to depression, isolation, drug abuse, and suicide. And I'm not making this up. Unfortunately, the statistics show that that's what happened in the past 18 months. Please, we beg you, it's time for some self-reflection. Make the right decisions for our children. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Our next speaker will be Alice Krangen.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, you can say it however you want.
Apologies, how do you pronounce your name?
You can say it however you want. I don't care to be known. Thank you.
Okay, you have 3 minutes to discuss the first read of the instructional time model for 2021-2022.
Perfect. Thank you. Am I on?
You are.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, first off, for letting me speak. I actually showed up for the meeting tonight and was extremely disappointed to find out that the board decided to move locations, perhaps because they were concerned about parents that were protesting their rights against the masks for children. But as that is not what I'm allowed to talk about right now, we will talk about the time model. I did have a very elegant speech written out that went into a lot of personal reasons why I wanted to attend this meeting, talk to the board, but I'll just go into it. What you're doing is against the law. If I was sitting on the board, I would be more concerned with breaking the law than abusing practice that have been found to be futile by science, not mass appeal, science. The benefit does not outweigh the risk and is questionable considering flu is far more detrimental to children. Yet we have existed for decades without having any prevalent fear of them dying from the flu. We were concerned about parents that were protesting their rights against the mask.
Again, as a reminder, the discussion tonight is limited to a first read of the instructional time model for the 2021-2022 school year. Our next speaker is Sarah Darden.
Hello.
Hi, Sarah. You have 3 minutes to discuss the first read of the instructional time model for 2021-2022.
Thank you. I just wanted to say I was kind of compelled to call when hearing of the, I guess, plan for the kids that do get quarantined, whether they have COVID or are sent home because they were in close contact. I was a little disheartened. I'm glad the teacher for special education called in and kind of voiced from their perspective what virtual learning is like for the special education students. I do have 3 students. One is in special education, and I can tell you that virtual instruction, it doesn't work for self-contained special education. These aren't kids, like she said, that need help with reading or extra time on math. These are kids that cannot function in daily activities. So if my daughter were to get sent home for quarantine because she was a close contact to somebody, she would not only not be able to be at home alone by herself because she is not functional to be able to be safe by herself. That would then force me to miss work for 10 days, however long you guys decide that she has to stay home before she's allowed back. And virtual instruction, it does not work. I am not a board certified special education teacher. I am not an occupational therapist. I am not a speech therapist. I am not a physical therapist. My job is outside of the home doing other things. She is in school because she needs these resources, and they cannot be replicated, duplicated adequately in a virtual environment. So unless you're saying that a teacher is going to physically come to my house and sit with her and give her her IEP minutes in person, it's not going to be the same. So I implore you to please think twice when you just do a blanket across the board. These students will get all these resources and it'll be great, because it doesn't work for everybody. And I can't imagine sitting at home with my daughter again, having her scream at a screen that's the size of a tablet while she's trying to talk to somebody because she's nonverbal through her augmentative communication device. And they can't hear that because it's through a speaker, through another speaker, through their speaker. That's just want to let you know the reality that some of us face if these quarantines are forced on us. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Heather Chung.
Hello, can you hear me?
Hi, Heather, we can. You have 3 minutes to discuss the first read of the instructional time model for 2021-2022.
Thank you. My name's Heather Chung. I'm a mom of Scottsdale schools. I have a 4th grader that is able to be in the gifted program. And then on the opposite spectrum, I have a little boy in something called a model classroom, which is not the SCA classroom. It's in a smaller classroom where he gets a very small classroom. And so thank you, Jesse Torres, earlier for talking. I just want to say right now, thank you to all the teachers for your support. We have the best principal and vice principal I've ever had, and we have the best teachers for my kids. My daughter is one and so I'm just trying to stick on this first instruction timeline, along with other kids, has had to quarantine. I got a notification from the principal And I know you can't answer questions, but when I got the notification, it was pretty well written where it does say that basically if she wouldn't have to quarantine if both of the kids were wearing masks. So I thank you for letting us know that. Hopefully when fewer, less quarantine, when more kids are wearing masks and implementing these strategies to minimize the spread of the virus. That being said, we will do instruction online and we're trying as hard as we can, but even for my daughter who's really pretty good at school, she's had a very difficult time and lots of tears this week. So I thank you for the opportunity to letting over 700 parents know today that we are all able to mask up and limit COVID exposure. As a nurse practitioner and working with lots of healthcare providers, I'm very happy that.
As a reminder, the discussion tonight is limited to the discussion of the first read of the instructional time model for 2021-2022. Our next speaker is Brent Doe.
Yeah, good evening. My name is actually Brent Presentine. I've chosen not.
I apologize.
Yeah, I'm not going by Brent Doe because I think it's important to speak up. Let me first say that the last 18 months have been very difficult for all of us. And I'd like to applaud the effort that has been made by not only all of you on the board, not all of you representing the administration of the district, but all of the teachers and staff across the district from navigating what has been decidedly the worst 18 months of most of our lives. Tonight, in terms of the learning model, I want to just say that bad policy doesn't remedy bad policy. And I'm speaking as someone whose son was already a COVID close contact, and I've watched this policy play out in practice. I think that your efforts should be applauded, and I think that you all think you're doing the right thing. But I want to remind all of you that you were elected to serve as voices for us, the parents. So while you think you're doing the right thing, I think your motives might be a little off. When you consider that this policy is very broad and allows for 90 days of in-person versus 90 days remote, that's a lot of leeway. And I think the primary motive for this, and this isn't a Q&A session, but I think the primary motive for you all is financial. I think I heard some things tonight that confirm that for me in terms of the changes of how absences are counted and how that's going to change your funding. I'm a little disappointed, but not surprised to hear, from our VP, whose former job was to be the president of the teachers union. And one of her first questions is ask about who's going to get staffed for tutoring, whether it's district or outside. We know who she answers to. Next, the president. You want to be seen as doing something. I get it, because you're angling for your next political career because, frankly, you don't have kids in the district, and you were elected, your father's money. And finally, we have a superintendent who was hired, and if you read up on Dr. Menzel, while well-intentioned, his application of progressive policies on a district whose makeup is decidedly moderate is negatively affecting our children. And I think this time model was discussed well in advance. I think you all had this ready to go. And I think the example of that is simple. At Hopi, where the COVID cases went from 4 in the first week to 3 in the second week, a COVID outbreak letter was not sent until the second week to align with some of the lawsuits that were filed, some of the decisions that were made in court. I think this model was ready to go, fully baked, and you're now in session 1 of 2 that needs to happen before you can impose it upon us. I think the fact that you made this meeting virtual, while I appreciate the opportunity to speak, I think it's a little unfair and unbecoming of the positions you all hold, given that you answer to us. You were elected to speak for the parents, not yourselves and your backers. Thanks.
Thank you. Our next speaker will be Dr. Payal Patel.
Hello.
Hi, Dr. Patel. You have 3 minutes to discuss the first read of the instructional time model for 2021-2022.
Thank you so much for allowing me the time to speak. I'm speaking both as a very concerned parent as well as a pediatric specialist in the Valley. And I think it's really important to just take a moment to recognize and acknowledge that we are all here because we want the best for our kids. And I know a lot of issues have become politicized, but I thank the board and I applaud you all for discussing an instructional time model, because I think this will allow children to receive an education when they're not able to be in person, whether this be COVID or it be the flu or lice or RSV, but for whatever reason, when they cannot be in person. I think it's important that we have this set up. And I think it's important that we set up a model in place for those situations and plan for the worst and hope for the best. I think it's also extremely important to recognize that this is not permanent. While COVID is unfortunately probably going to be endemic, we can't yet compare it to the flu. We do not have a vaccine to significantly decrease hospitalization, ICU admission, and death. And right now, it's not death that we're the most scared about. It's the long-term sequelae and complications that are affecting the children who are being admitted to my hospital. It's what I see. And I agree with the lady who spoke before me that I have looked at parents' eyes because their child has killed themselves or been, admitted for suicidal ideations. It's real. Online schooling is so rough. I'm not good at it. My younger kid is not good at it. It is hard. And I just want to finish up by saying that not only are you completely supported by the scientific community, and we applaud you for looking out for our kids because we need to put every single mitigation strategy in place, but you're also so strongly supported by the teachers as well. And I just wanted to finish up by pointing out the president of the largest teachers union in the country, Becky Mingle, also strongly cites the use of every single mitigation strategy in our toolbox to protect our kids in this moment. It will get better. We will have vaccines.
Again, I must remind our speakers tonight that the discussion is narrowly focused on first read of the instructional time model for 2021-2022. Our next speaker is Heidi Combs.
Good evening. My name is Heidi Combs. I'm a parent of 2 elementary-aged children here in the Scottsdale Unified School District. In speaking to the instructional time model, I find it really interesting that we are yet again starting from scratch with a new instructional model when we quarantine healthy children. The district spent a lot of money on cameras last year to make sure that our children were staying connected, not only to their teachers, but also to their peers. And then when we were forced in December to make a decision on whether to go back in person or to stay online, those cameras were taken away. And so now those cameras sit in classrooms and they're not being used. Why we're not using the resources that we've already spent money on to continue to engage our kids, not only with each other in the classroom, but also with their teachers, I'm not quite sure why we're not doing that. I feel like when it comes to our situation with this instructional time model, we're not adopting let's work smarter, not harder. We're working, I feel like, as a district and as parents and also as teachers now are going to be working a lot harder when we already have the tools set in place to keep our children connected with their peers and with their teachers, but they sit in the classroom and they're off. At some point, I feel like we have to weigh the benefits and the risks in terms of quarantining our healthy kids and keeping them disconnected from their peers and their teachers and the relationships that they've already built. There is a lot more that I know many parents would love to have discussed tonight that have called in, but the fact that the board is cherry picking what people can talk about tonight and closing this meeting to the public only proves that you're trying to control a narrative. It is disappointing as a parent, a former educator, and a taxpayer in this district that we are using time, money, effort, and exhausting, again, our teachers and the parents in this community and not utilizing the resources that we already have at hand and keeping our healthy kids in school, learning, and in person so they can thrive. because that is why we are here, for our children.
Thank you. Our next speaker will be Brittany Hakak.
Yep, that's me.
Hi, Brittany.
Hi.
You have 3 minutes to discuss the first read of the instructional time model for 2021-2022.
Okay, thank you for letting me speak. My name is Brittany Hawcock, and I have 3 students enrolled at Scottsdale Unified School District. I have an 8th grader, a 6th grader, and a 9-year-old over at Hopi, 2 Ingleside. The first week of school, the kids go to a party because they're kids, and there's some COVID because it's contagious disease. We've all had it. And I get a letter saying that she can't go to school. So I want to walk you through what an actual day of online schooling looks like for moms. So my daughter wakes up, opens up her screen, turns off the camera, scrolls through, a little Snapchat, asks you to get her something to eat. I'm trying to keep her focused, but she's half awake. My son, who is 9, who loves school, tries to sneak in some Fortnite, when I'm looking, or if I'm busy making my daughter a sandwich, he'll fight me on every single subject because I'm his mom, and now I'm a personal assistant, a mom and a teacher. My middle child, who is like, I got this, Mom, she just looks on what the kids are doing is they're just going on Google, looking up all the answers. They may call their friends and on a group chat and get the answers to the questions. I'm trying to figure out how to do math right now, but I don't remember how to do math from the 8th grade. So my mom takes my eldest daughter to help me out, and guess what that ends up happening? She ends up doing all her work for her because kids can't learn in front of a TV screen. And then what happens is her friends come cruise by because they're healthy, grabs on fat scooter. They may go grab a coffee at Starbucks, roll back in. And thank God I don't have to work right now. I try to go back to work. Clearly, that's not going to happen. And my ex-husband, God bless men, but they have to work and they don't know how to upload and do all this stuff. They won't do it. So it falls on the moms. So now we're personal assistants, we're teachers, we're trying to get our kids off of social media, and all they're doing is they have half their ear on the TV screen, but they put the camera off. They don't actually, they don't have to show their face. And they cruise around, and if they happen to get, ask a question, they pop back in once in a while. How much snacks they have to eat on a full day? If I have to run a couple of errands, that's not going to happen. So my middle child, who needs more supervision, is basically Googling all of her answers. It is my son, who loves school, goes to school. He has a cough because he's wearing a mask. He coughs and they're like, oh, he's sick. I go, well, he has got allergies. I promise you he's not sick. I just had a negative test. Sorry, you got to go. And then what about the siblings? So if one of them's sick, they all hang out together at parties. And the older kids, yeah, it's contagious. It's a virus. It's a mild flu symptoms, but they're kids. They have to live their life. So then they go back to school and then guess what happens? Oh, another letter. You're in quarantine. How are moms supposed to even hold down a job? Thank God my family has support, but kids aren't actually learning anything. What we're doing is we're cheating for our children, and we're trying to get them to wake up when they're laying in bed, and we're feeding them sandwiches. That's
Our next speaker will be Kate McCrellis.
I'm ready when you are.
Kate, you may begin.
Thank you. First of all, I want to say that my heart goes out to these other parents who also struggle to help their children reach their potential during online learning. These kids deserve better. Making this meeting virtual is also important to note. If you didn't want to meet in person, then how can we send our children into the buildings without any mitigation measures beyond sending them home to have to deal with this controversial instructional time model? I have 3 children home in quarantine today after waiting in line for 2 hours to get COVID tests last night. The only same-day test that we were able to schedule was a 30-minute drive from our home, despite calling our pediatrician, Walgreens, CVS, and other Embry testing locations. Everyone was booked solid. This is most certainly reminiscent of the previous COVID waves, and hospital occupancy rates are also indicative of a 4th surge. So I ask that we not remain willfully blind to these facts. We sheltered in place until February. We would have kept our children home longer, but they were not thriving with online learning. This decision was also driven by the fact that I had personally known children who developed PTSD and ended up in psych wards due to suicidal ideation from the, just the duration and hardship of lockdown. We want in-person learning to continue. The schools are better off using preventive measures to avoid the necessity of having to put children in the instructional time model. Our schools are here to teach our kids to use data-driven decisions and sound reasoning to make, data-driven sound reasoning to make good decisions. We should teach them that they should rely on data and science to make decisions. The data shows that the most effective way to prevent illness from COVID and to keep our children learning safely in person is to require masks. The risk of not wearing masks far outweigh the small amount of effort and costs that are required to wear a mask. To call mask wearing child abuse is absurd and unsupported by mental health professionals. We need to remember that many have made a
Thank you. As a reminder, this is a discussion about the first read of the instructional time model for 2021-2022. Our next speaker is Kelsey Hassler.
Hi, can you hear me?
We can, Kelsey. You have 3 minutes to discuss the first read of the instructional time model for 2021-2022.
Okay, thanks for taking my call. That wasn't what I planned on talking about, but you're cutting people off, so I will talk about that. I've listened to the comments, and it seems that the overwhelming majority seem to disagree with this plan, so I don't really understand why we would continue this meeting, because it seems like people, they just don't want this. So what I think about the instructional time model, it's not sustainable, it's wrong, it's cruel. A lot of the other comments have mentioned things that I would have said, but the point of school is for children to be in school. You need to listen to the parents. The nature of this virus, like it's just not going to go away. So we need to move on and let the kids go to school. Our tax dollars are paying for this. The public is clearly demanding it. The nature of bureaucracy is that it's slow and ineffective. So as clearly illustrated by this meeting, keep the kids in school. Our kids are falling behind. You guys need to do your jobs. This plan, while it's great, it's pie in the sky. It's not sustainable. It's worthless. Our kids are falling behind. It's keeping kids out of school. The kids are going to be fine. The kids deserve better than this. Our jobs as parents and adults is to protect the children. We're doing the exact opposite. We are harming them. They need to be in school. They need to be around people. They need to be with their teachers. They don't want to learn from their parents. They want to learn from teachers. They want to be with their friends. And I understand the need to the whole CYA part of this, that, nobody wants to get sued, but do your job. The kids need to be in school. You guys are elected officials, and you guys did not hold this meeting as a public meeting because you guys don't want to look into the faces of the parents and the children you allegedly represent. You are elected officials. This is a sham, and it's a farce, and it's a joke. I mean, do your job. Please, let's be in school. Thank you. And keep the mask off kids. That's ridiculous.
Thank you. Our next speaker will be Jennifer Ritchie.
Hi, my name is Jennifer Ritchie. I have 3 children. 2 I took them out of SUSD last year, and 1 is still in SUSD. Unfortunately, the foundation was never laid for him in the very beginning, so I had to keep him in school. I am also a CASA. I am a CASA, which is a court-appointed special advocate for foster kids. And what I do is I make sure that those kids have the best opportunities they can in this world. And right now, shutting down schools and sending these kids home and quarantining them is hurting them. They have no lunches. They have no teachers looking after them with bruises and broken arms or whatever it may be. They have no friends. They have nothing. They don't have a fancy computer or internet. They don't have a parent to go home and make sure they're doing the right thing. If you are quarantining my CASA kids, they are out on the streets, leaving their group homes. It's not doing any justice. The masks do nothing but harm our children. It's hurting it's madness. The mental illness is so real. I see it in my CASA kids. To not see a smile on their face, to also to tell everybody that they have to wear a mask and to vaccinate and do this, stay home. If you want to be vaccinated and you don't feel safe, stay home. You want to wear the mask, stay home. Let us all.
next speaker is Kate Smith.
Yes, hello.
Hi, Kate. You have 3 minutes to discuss the first read of the instructional time model for 2021-2022.
Okay, thanks for taking my call. I'm calling as an educator. I teach high school in the district, and I'm also a community member for the last 20 years. I grew up in this district. I just want to make it clear that the teachers have had no heads up about what's been going on. To say that teachers are in support of this plan or know what's going on is just a lie. I don't know what population that's coming from, but I've heard absolutely nothing about it. And none of my colleagues that I've spoken to have heard anything about it. So it's dropping out of thin air as things have been going on since last March. So I want to make it clear that all that we've been told so far is that we need to have a digital classroom through an LMS like Google Classroom, which is no big deal and fine. The only people that can understand what's going on here are the teachers and the students. And I think that until somebody comes and steps in my shoes and is me for a week, or steps in one of my students' shoes and is them for a week, you really can't understand what's going on in the classroom and the struggle that it is. And the parent who was talking about her kids being on the computer and not doing anything was 1000% correct. And it should be known that as far as high school, I think for sure we need to look at different needs for different student populations, whether it's special ed, whether it's elementary, middle, but for high school students, online learning looks like, as a teacher, me staring at a kid's ceiling fan, and the students having no accountability, which has really been an issue. It was horrific for us last year. The return to school has been amazing. As teachers and students, it's been wonderful to be back together, to see each other. And that's what the kids need. They need the accountability. They need things to go back to normal. And I also really don't think it's fair for teachers to be asked to give up any more of their time, whether they're being paid for it or not. When I leave work in the afternoon, I go home to continue to work. I work over the weekends. So for me to be asked, and I would feel obligated, to be honest, to do these tutoring hours is so unfair. Our jobs change left and right. It's like I'm a dog on a leash and I'm just being yanked in a million directions. So the last thing I want to say is that what teachers really need, I think, is additional support. I would be happy to utilize my camera and every other piece of technology in my room. By the way, most of which I use was not actually provided by the district, something I've provided myself. But if someone was sitting in my room with me to assist me, it sounds silly, but to turn that camera on when you've got 30 kids in your room and you have 5 classes a day, it's another thing to remember, and to post things online and to do all of those things. If someone was sitting with me, supporting me, holding my hand and telling me, you can do this, that would be helpful. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Dr. Daniel Lester.
Hello.
Hi, Dr. Lester. You have 3 minutes to discuss the first read of the instructional time model for 2021-2022.
Yes, I just had a couple questions. Maybe they can answer afterwards. How long is this program going to go on for? Is there a start date and end date? And just wondering if they think that this is sustainable for that time period. And then, yeah, that's about it.
Thank you. Our next speaker is John Antioco.
Yes, thank you. I'll go ahead and start. I had a much more prepared statement, but I'm going to have to kind of wing it now. Can everybody hear me okay? But
we can.
First of all, I did not catch the woman's name who just spoke, but as a teacher, I want to first say thank you. I probably can't say it enough, and I can't imagine how difficult the last year and a half has been for them. In terms of the online learning and in terms of what we do for kids that have either tested positive or have to be quarantined, while all of us wanted a low infection rate within the student body population, we knew it wasn't going to be zero. It is very low, it's 0.3%, but we knew it wasn't going to be zero. There was going to be at least one case. And for the school district and the board members and the organizations not to have a plan in place before school even started, for those kids that invariably were going to have to either be quarantined or caught the virus itself, is just baffling. It's just baffling. And I'm just kind of astounded that we are 3 weeks into the school year and trying to figure it out. It's one thing a year ago, but we knew COVID was here in 2021. So I think everybody's got to take and I know a lot of work has gone into that online learning, but everybody needs to take a good hard look at themselves and to understand and try to figure out, why are we scrambling in August when this should have been in place in June or July? And for those of us that chose to have in-person learning, there should have been a better solution for those kids that didn't test positive, but are quarantined. And I know the parent earlier talked about being online for 2 hours to get a COVID test. That's unacceptable. There should have been a system in place for students that needed a COVID test to show that they were negative, to get them back in the classrooms as quickly as possible. And I guess last piece, since there's a topic that's been deemed verboten by the board to discuss, I'll just talk in general terms. If we have a school district that decides laws that we don't like or rules that we don't like, we don't become optional, where does that lead us long term? If and I'm just talking in general terms. If somebody later on decides to vote for something that goes against the law, if not now, in 5 weeks, you really have to ask yourself if you're in the right position. And if that's the right message you're sending to the parents, the students, the faculty, and the staff. And I go back to that teacher who you could hear in her voice was frustrated and didn't have a clue what was going on. And maybe that's what the focus should be on, is communicating better with the parents,
thank you,
students.
Our next speaker will be William Sullivan.
Thank you, board members. Regarding HB 2862, I just had a few recommendations for the online learning, and that would be to find teachers who are tech savvy that would want to do it. For instance, you could have a teacher be the teacher of the year many years in a row. They've been there for 20 years in person. They're absolutely amazing. But when it comes to technology, they might just be clumsy with it, or they just might not be interested in it. And then that could affect the learning performance of the students. So I would really inquire the staff to say, hey, if you do have to do the online learning with HB 2862, find people that are interested in doing that. I know resources are thin right now during this pandemic, but we're all doing the best that we can. Even simple things like teaching them maybe how to do a speedtest.net bandwidth test to make sure they have the right amount of internet bandwidth to properly display their computer screen onto the student's computer remotely. I also wanted to say, Benjamin Franklin, he once said, those who would give up essential liberty to purchase a little temporary safety deserve neither liberty nor safety. My kids will not wear a mask. You can suck them. We deserve freedom, and we're not going to take your tyranny. And it's a shame.
Thank you. Our final speaker will be Sarah Yaron.
Hello, thank you so much for taking my call. I don't envy your position. I don't envy the teacher's positions. I was a special education teacher for 10 years, so I especially appreciate what the special education teacher had to say about her students being able to access the general curriculum and learning. It's really important that we not conflate issues. Regarding the instructional time model, we have to discuss faith. Okay, the free and appropriate public education for all, it looks different for everybody. okay? Do I want it to be able to meet the educational, emotional, physical health needs of my kids? Absolutely. Did online learning do that last year? We were online for the majority of the year last year. No, it did not. However, it is a free and appropriate public education. SOL is designed to be a free and appropriate public education. It doesn't meet all of the needs that I would like to be checked off because how could it? You're online. But this program that you're discussing seems to be for the short term, for the kids who are quarantined, icing on the cake. Because if we aren't taking every mitigation strategy, there will be more lapse in these kids' educational background. And we will be facing a future with kids who have learning gaps. So the fact that you are providing something for the kids that need to quarantine because we're in a pandemic and they were exposed or close contact with somebody who tested positive, to me, it's a good step in the right direction. I definitely agree that it should have been figured out prior to the school year. However, I do think that instead of just putting kids on SOL, not that it's not a lovely program, but I do think that having the connection with an actual person every day would be really helpful. This is not, as far as, and also the inequities, of course, that is a situation that needs to be addressed. And that is on the district to make sure that these kids that don't have access to internet, that they receive their education as well. But this is not easy. It's difficult. Pandemics are difficult. Public health, difficult. So as far as the mitigation strategies, we should be employing every single one that we can to make sure that our students are supported. That's it for me. Thank you.
We do not have any more speakers at this time, but pursuant to Arizona's open meeting law, ARS 38-431-01H, it should be noted that at the conclusion of an open call to the public, individual members of the public body may respond to criticism made by those who have addressed the public body, may ask staff to review a matter, or may ask that a matter be put on a future agenda. However, members of the public body shall not discuss or take legal action on matters raised during an open call to the public unless the matters are properly noticed for discussion and legal action. And I would like to first refer a number of matters to Dr. Menzel, Dr. Yaron, and Dr. Hagigat, a number of issues that were raised by members of the public, beginning first with special education and students with other needs, how our instructional model can be modified or how we can provide supports to those students should they be quarantined according to the Maricopa County Department of Public Health quarantine requirements. Also address the issue of internet help, technology help, computer and internet provisions that we can provide to students should they need it. Address the question of instructional time, 3 hours of additional tutoring time versus the requirements in the law to make sure that we are fully compliant if this plan goes into effect. When the plan will go into effect, we received a question about the fact that this law was only passed very recently and does not go into effect until September 29th, 2021. So when this plan will go into effect and for how long, what is the duration planned for. As well as we were asked about teacher notifications. A number of teachers indicated that they were not aware of this plan, so how that will be addressed and how that is addressed. As a reminder to the public, this is a first read. There will be a second hearing on August 24th at the earliest, as well as the cost of tutoring using teachers and the cost of using Varsity Tutoring. On the matter of direct criticism, I do want to make a couple points. Insofar as the board is aware, this is the first time that the board has been presented with this plan. We have not had a meeting or been sent any materials before this week on this plan for educating students in quarantine. I believe, but I could be incorrect, that the reason for that is that this law was just recently passed. So beforehand, the only thing we could do was mark students as excused absent, which is essentially treating a student as if they have the flu in which case, like in the case of flu or other excused absence, staff are usually just expected to provide instructional materials for the students to use at home. As for the meeting location, because of the short notice, Mojave District Annex, where we hold our public hearings and special meetings, there is a curriculum night tonight from 6 to 8 p.m. We were not able to schedule this meeting any earlier than 6 today, and with both the protest and counter protests that were scheduled, the need to have additional space and police presence, it simply was not possible to host it. Finally, the issue of quarantine. Again, the quarantine is a required quarantine by the Maricopa County Department of Public Health. You would have to review the Maricopa County Department of Public Health order individually be socializing at parties or other extracurricular activities and events. They are supposed to be in quarantine. So I think that is something that those who commented on that aspect would need to review with the Maricopa County Department of Public Health order on their quarantines. Are there any other board members' requests to direct matters to staff or to address criticism or ask that a matter be put on a future agenda? There is no request at this time. With that, the board will move to agenda item 2A, adjournment, the adjournment of the public hearing. The chair moves to adjourn this public hearing of the Scottsdale Unified Number 48 Governing Board at 9 p.m. Is there a second?
Second.
Vice President Sanowski seconds. It is moved and seconded that the Governing Board adjourn this public hearing of the Scottsdale Unified Number 48 Governing Board at 9 p.m. All those in favor say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Aye. All those opposed say no. The motion carries 5-0 and the public hearing is adjourned. The board will now move to agenda item 3A, called order. The chair calls to order this special meeting of the Scottsdale Unified Number 48 Governing Board on August 17th, 2021 at 9 p.m. Vice President Sanowski, will you please lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance, and if everyone else could please mute their microphones.
Sure. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Vice President Sanowski. The chair will have a roll call. Board Member Lindsay.
Zach Lindsay.
Board Member Hart-Wells.
Libby Hart-Wells.
Board Member Beckman.
Patty Beckman.
Vice President Sanowski.
Julie Sanowski.
And Jan Michael Greenberg. All 5 board members are present and there is a quorum. The board will move to agenda item 3D, approval of agenda, board action required. Are there any amendments to the agenda as presented? The chair moves to approve the agenda as presented. Is there a second?
Second.
Vice President Sanowski seconds. It is moved and seconded that the agenda be approved as presented. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed say no. The motion carries 5-0 and the agenda is approved. The board will now move to agenda item 4A, action item, board action required, discussion and consideration of instituting a mask requirement. Dr. Menzel.
Thank you, President Greenberg, Vice President Sanowski, and members of the governing board. I appreciate your time and attention to the first reading of the instructional time model. I want to just make a few introductory remarks before turning this over to Dr. Hart-Wells related to her request for the special meeting. First, I think it's important to remind everyone here that we prioritized in-person learning. That's been a top goal of ours. We recognize the impact of COVID on our students and particularly as we started last school year with everyone online, that having in-person instruction available was absolutely critical. At the start of the year, we did begin with a mask option, and it was a part of what not only we had expressed that we would do back in May of last year. We always qualified it by saying no one knows for certain what the conditions will be when we start the school year, but it was fully our intent. And in fact, we also got legal advice that indicated that the budget reconciliation bill with the retroactive provision related to the prohibition on a mask mandate was effective. And so we proceeded under that understanding. At the same time, we also made a commitment that we would follow the law related to the federal requirements to mandate masks on buses. So we've been consistent from the beginning of this year related to following the laws as we understood them. And tonight we're having a conversation in part because there was a clarification with respect to when the budget reconciliation bill, particularly the prohibition on a mask mandate, takes effect. And on Monday of this week, the judge ruled for Phoenix Union High School District, indicating that the prohibition takes effect on September 29th, and that the retroactive clause could not be used to circumvent the requirements of our Constitution that would allow a bill to take immediate effect. And so, as I understand it this evening, we have an opportunity as a governing board and as district leadership to have a conversation about whether or not it's advisable to move forward with the mask requirement up until the time that the law takes effect. I think the other thing that's important to note, and it was outlined in my letter on Friday, is that we have been observing in our schools a significant number of cases. They're happening at a rate that was higher than the only time that it was higher was December 4th of last year, where we had 73 cases. And between August 13th and August 16th, we already have 43 cases, a total of 95 on-campus positive cases since the beginning of the school year. And we're just 9 days in. And as we look at the number of students who have been quarantined and the number of close contacts for those not only on campus, but also off campus positive cases, we're seeing significant numbers. So my ask to the community was to voluntarily join us in implementing the mitigation strategy that seemed to work very well last year. As noted in that communication, we did not see significant spread of COVID on our campuses. And what was different last year than this year was not only a different variant of the virus, but also the fact that our students were masked on campus. I don't like to wear a mask personally, but I also believe that we should be doing everything in our power to ensure that our students can attend school in person. And so that's been our focus, and mine as a superintendent is to figure out what we can do to keep our schools open and to minimize the disruption to our students. And so on Friday, we did get a special request to hold this meeting to have the conversation, and I'd like to ask Dr. Hartwells to outline the reasons for her request.
Thank you, Dr. Menzel. So as you've just heard, because I've been transparent about it, I did make a request for this evening's special board meeting, specifically to talk about the possibility of reinstating a mask requirement on school campuses during school hours. I want to explain why I did that. And I think you heard almost every speaker this evening confirm the basis of why I made that request, and that's because our students need to be in school. I know we agree on that as a community. We all want our students in school learning. And I teach chemistry, so I can attest that learning on a good day can be difficult. But that difficulty is increased if you're ill, if a loved one is ill or fragile, if you feel alone or frustrated because you need help with your work, or you can't join your sports team at practice or a game. We agree that schools provide and are required to provide a safe and healthy environment for students to grow into independent, contributing members of society. And I believe we can also agree that not having students in school learning is anything but healthy. Last year, I made clear my position that in order to do that, we needed to mask up. And when the COVID vaccines were authorized for emergency use during our emergency of worldwide proportions, I and my family, we bared our arms and we got immunized. Why? Because those are the two of the most cost-effective and health-effective strategies widely available to ensure our health and safety from infectious diseases. Are they foolproof? No. They're not silver bullets. Are face covering muzzles? No, they're not. Have face coverings been documented since the 14th century as a public health tool for protection from respiratory pandemics? Yes. So why stop this airborne virus? I'm going to address some questions or assertions that we've received from members of the community. So some of you have asked, why would we just let it go? It's like the cold. Well, one reason is that giving this virus carte blanche on humanity allows it to change, allows it to perfect itself, and change it has. It's opportunistic, and just like opportunistic people, that's never going to be enough. It will continue to want more. What we've learned now, and what we understand about pandemics, is that we have to manage them with productive and constructive individual-based decisions and community-based decisions. Not one or the other, both. So, as some of you noted, in a community-based decision made last May with hope and informed with the best available information at the time that was indicating the COVID-19 positive cases were waning, SUSD committed to a change in policy to be mask optional. Mask optional, so relying entirely on individual-based decisions to get us over the finish line. And you just heard Dr. Menzel tell you how that's gone. So at the end of the school day yesterday, 9 full days in, we have over 2,000 students out of school, whether because of a confirmed positive COVID test or because they've met the Maricopa County Department of Public Health's definition of a close contact, and so they're required to quarantine. That is not an SUSD policy, that is a public health requirement. That's almost 10% of the students district-wide right now. So today, I also learned as of about mid-afternoon, I was told that these numbers have continued to increase. On top of that, our nursing staff is overwhelmed, fielding reasonable and unreasonable interactions with parents in their attempts to carry out their legally required process of contact tracing and quarantining. So as of tomorrow, 10% or more of the student population will not be in school learning. And that didn't happen last year. It didn't even come close to happening last year. Why? In part, because we used the centuries-old practical mitigation strategy of wearing masks. Folks, this is getting away from us. If you support your kids being in-person learning, then it is time to support pulling that very sharp arrow of mask wearing out of our figurative quiver and using it. Some of you have argued doing this isn't legal. You heard Dr. Menzel comment about the Phoenix Union case, the ruling yesterday. I also want to point out that Executive Order 2021-10, which is titled Providing Schools Options for Face Coverings, remains in effect. The omnibus budget bill passed this summer that included that prohibition on public schools, not private schools, public schools, to require masks in schools also does not take effect until September 29th, which is the same day that Executive Order 2021-10 rescinds. So to put a fine point on this, SUSD remains in compliance with all laws, regulations, and orders, and would remain so if reinstituting a mask requirement. Again, this is getting away from us. And so it is with the utmost care, concern, and grace, and without any malice, that I ask my fellow members of the board to support reinstating a mask requirement for all persons on all SUSD school properties during school hours with no opt-out provision, but rather with the exceptions that were consistent with those that were used last year in the 2020-2021 school year, and for that reinstatement to expire at 5:00 p.m. on September 28th. Thank you.
Thank you, Board Member Hartwells. Dr. Menzel, do you have any comments first on the proposed directive, or would you prefer that we move to other board member comments at this time?
I think we should take other comments at this time, and I'm happy to answer any questions if there are any that arise.
Thank you. Are there any board member questions or comments at this time? Vice President Sanowski.
Yes, I have a question real quick. Dr. Hartwells, you talk about the exceptions. Are our special education students considered one of those exceptions to wearing a mask if for whatever reason it's deemed by their teacher that it is in their best interest to not have that mask on?
Well, thank you for the question, Vice President Sanowski. I'm going to ask Dr. Menzel. I am under my understanding is there were exceptions made last school year in limited circumstances, and my proposal was to consider using that same infrastructure that was established last year. And I don't know, Dr. Menzel, if you wish to speak to what those specific exemptions or exceptions were.
So there was a medical exception or exemption from wearing a mask, and that could include students with IEPs. I think Lori Bird can also speak to accommodations for students with IEPs and how that provision of statute would come into play here.
It's not letting me turn on my camera. There we go. Good evening, members of the board, Dr. Menzel, President Greenberg, Vice President Sanowski. The Americans with Disabilities Act, as well as the IDEA, would provide that a student who is unable to wear a mask be provided with a reasonable accommodation. That can include a variety of things. I think if you look at the CDC recommendation, as well as recommendations by county public health, state and local public health agencies, that there are certain medical exemptions that are appropriate. For example, any person that cannot remove the mask, any person for which mask wearing is contraindicated by their physician. And there are also other accommodations and workarounds that can be used that would keep us in compliance with our responsibilities to provide reasonable accommodation as well as a free and appropriate public education to our students with learning challenges.
If I may continue with that question along similar lines.
Oh, of course.
Would that also, those exceptions also include our medically fragile staff members that we have on our campuses?
Yes, anytime you have a requirement, you have to consider valid medically based or disability based exemptions. I can tell you that it would need to be, there are, again, for example, a face shield may or may not be appropriate. These things would need to be considered on a case-by-case basis in consultation with both the staff person as well as whatever medical or disability-related documentation that they would provide. But it's my understanding that anytime you have a workplace requirement in place, you have to make allowance for reasonable accommodation that still provides for the safety of those around you in the workplace.
Thank you.
If I may add to that, we put together very quickly an attachment that is on your board docs as a directive on this matter, and some of the exceptions that were considered in that draft are, of course, removing masks to have a snack or drink water or other beverages or eating food. Educational exceptions where, with principal permission, students could remove their masks if the activity in question would be impossible or dangerous. I figure, in my mind, I think of, again, you do have IEPs and some special needs courses where that might have to happen. You have band class. Oftentimes band is done outside, but even so, you can't really use horned instruments with a mask. There's a medical exception for accommodations. Perhaps the medical exceptions could just be accommodations in medical exceptions to account for what was just discussed. This is just a proposal, but we can approve it as with amendments. Board Member Lindsay, and then Vice President Sanowski.
Yeah, Dr. Menzel, on the quarantine close contacts, do you have any idea how many of those so far have tested positive for COVID, why they've been in quarantine?
So last year, we didn't have many. There were some, I don't have the exact numbers, but it was a very small number as we were tracking throughout the course of the year. I don't have the exact number here, and Whitney is with us. She might have a better sense, but my understanding is that we've seen more of the quarantined individuals test positive than we did last year. So Whitney, can you answer that question or provide some sense of numbers that we know at this point?
Good evening, board members. Can you hear me okay? So we don't have exact counts of this. Unfortunately, as Dr. Hotwell's mentioned, we have a nursing staff who are extremely overwhelmed, and maintaining those records has become quite difficult. But I can tell you, we have a number of campuses where outbreaks have been designated due to quarantine students testing positive. I know on at least 3 campuses, there are multiple students who have tested positive after being quarantined, and we are waiting for additional information from Maricopa County to confirm 2 other campuses.
Thank you. And Dr. Menzel, can you speak to the letter that Deer Valley Superintendent sent out this weekend with one of the mitigation strategies? He said that the infected student is wearing a mask, close contacts are wearing a mask. The masked students, close contacts, do not have to quarantine. So
I can't speak to what advice or counsel he may have gotten from Maricopa County Department of Public Health. I can say that I approached my contacts at Maricopa County Department of Public Health to ask the question: if everyone's masked, could we eliminate quarantine for asymptomatic individuals? So if someone's symptomatic, whether or not they're vaccinated or a close contact, being symptomatic changes the conversation. But if they're asymptomatic, then would that create an opportunity for us? And the answer I received was that the county really wants to stick with CDC guidance, and CDC said if they're all masked, then the close contact definition changes for students, changes from 6 feet to 3. I think there's an opportunity here to consider the educational impact, should the board want to, of keeping kids in school if they're asymptomatic and everyone was properly masked. So it's again a risk-reward consideration, and I don't expect that I would get a green light formally from the health department, but I do see a number of school districts that are looking at that as a way to keep as many students in school as long as possible. The operative provision is that everyone has to be masked and that they have to be asymptomatic. So I would be open to that conversation, but I don't know that we would get a full-throated endorsement.
Now, from my understanding, it's because the County Board of Supervisors doesn't want to take that recommendation, correct?
That's my understanding, but I'm not privy to any of their conversations. So I think that the following the CDC guidance provides a place to consistently say this is what we're doing.
Now, in your communications today, I didn't see anything about PV. PV made an announcement today that they are going to a mask mandate with an opt-out with that same verbiage about the students properly wearing masks, correct?
Correct. I think that a number of districts are moving in that direction. We've seen more districts, either board action or superintendent directed, to implement mask mandates because they're seeing similar numbers like we are in terms of spread. And they also share our concern that we want to minimize the disruption to the in-person learning experience, because we know how important that is for our students.
No, but the key in PV is they did a opt-out today too.
They did.
Yes. What do you have to say to site leaders that are very leery of a full-fledged mask mandate because of the law looming on the 29th and them having to become the mask enforcers and possibly have some confrontations?
This one becomes really challenging as a superintendent when you think about enforcement. It can be a concern. We know last year that our students were willing and able to, by and large, comply with the mask requirement. There were concerns when we started that way that there's no way that our kids could do it, but the truth is, by and large, they did a good job. Universally wearing it all the time, no. But I also think, from what I've seen in terms of the recommendations from public health officials, that the mask requirement is really when people are indoors. That there's still not an expectation when you're outside that you wear them. So the question about sweaty mask and some of the other things, those kind of were early experiences that we had. But as we got into March, April, May, when students were outside, they weren't required to wear them. And we found that our students were able to adapt. With the proposal to limit it to while you're inside in a classroom, I think that it's not true that kids would be wearing them from 7 a.m. to 3 p.m., that there are going to be many opportunities for them to not have to wear the mask. Our goal would be to reduce the potential spread. And when you think about how the level of transmission of the Delta variant, when kids are in classrooms with if you're in a high school classroom of 30 or 35, there's an elevated risk for those who are not vaccinated. There's still a risk for people who are vaccinated, but much less those who are not vaccinated and those who are on mask. If you're in that small classroom space with 30 to 35 kids and someone's COVID positive, there's an increased risk there. As much as I would like to say that people honor the request to stay home when you're sick, we have had many cases of symptomatic students and staff showing up to school. This is part of the challenge. And so when we think about what are the mitigation tools that we can put in place to keep our schools open for in-person learning to the maximum extent possible, this is one strategy in the short term, because we don't want this to be forever. The truth is, I'd like it to be as short as possible, but we're already starting to see this snowball effect that when you just do the statistical modeling gets to be very scary if you don't implement mitigation strategies.
I have a situation that hopefully I can get clarity on. So say you have a student, a special ed student, and they mainstream into a grade level class to be with their peers. The student cannot wear a mask. With a mask mandate, would that student be forced to wear a mask in the class with the peers in the mainstream, or would they be removed because they can't wear a mask and all the other students have to wear a mask?
So I'm gonna tell you how I understand it, and Lori can correct me if I'm wrong. That student wouldn't be removed from their placement. That would be a unilateral change, which is not permissible under the law, and they wouldn't be required to wear a face mask. So what we would be interested in is whether or not they were symptomatic for COVID. Because if they were, they would be expected not to come to school like anyone else who's symptomatic for COVID. But otherwise, the accommodation would apply in their IEP-approved placement. Lori, am I off on that one?
Yeah, I think it's not a dichotomy, Board Member Lindsay. I think it's not they're either in the classroom with a mask or they're removed from the classroom. Accommodation can be very creative, and we want to preserve a student's ability to be in their least restrictive environment. And the IEP team, in conjunction with, which includes the gen ed teacher, the parent, the special education teacher, and if the student's old enough, the student themselves, would find a way to make it work. That's been my experience when I look at how these accommodations are done. So it's not an either or situation. It's a we have to get creative situation to maintain the safety of all involved while preserving that student's right to access the general education curriculum.
Thank you.
Vice President Sanowski.
Yes, there were several comments made tonight by parents sharing what their experience was in trying to get their children tested. Is there a way for us to use our ESSER funds and potentially provide those tests while on campus? Those rapid tests, I know they're not perfect, but it would give us maybe a better indicator of whether a child did need to go into quarantine or not, because of course we want to keep our kids in the classroom learning and not being sent home because of close contact quarantine. So is this a potential assistant to making that happen?
So Whitney, can you talk about the test kits that we've been given and what we're still waiting on?
So the state has provided a couple versions of the rapid test to us. I'm
trying to figure
the
out.
reagent. Oh,
Whitney,
you still got me?
Whitney, you froze there.
Yep.
So that particular box of tests has to be sort of designated to a single person, because the reagent has to be placed inside this card before the test can be administered. So you couldn't actually give them to someone and send them home. We do have a second batch of the rapid tests that come to a package similar to the ones you can purchase at Walgreens. Unfortunately, the county does not have a plethora of those yet. They're still waiting for some shipments. So I only have about 600 or so of those tests available. So I wouldn't be able to distribute them widely to be used as rapidly as they're being needed at this particular time. And I will tell you, we've talked to the nurses, and adding this additional layer of testing for them to do is, for lack of a better term, not possible at this moment with all the additional things that they're dealing with.
Good to know. Thank you.
Board Member Beckman.
Yeah, a couple of things. For whatever it's worth, I received what Paradise Valley used with regard to the quarantine, and I'm reading this. The CDC has indicated that for exposed students in a classroom, quarantine is not necessary if both students were wearing a mask and were within 3 to 6 feet of each other. For whatever it's worth, that is what they used. Whitney, can you tell me what numbers constitute an outbreak? Just remind kind of the community.
Sure. So an outbreak designated by the Maricopa County Department of Public Health would be 2 epidemiologically linked cases. So, and I'll give you an example. We've had situations where students tested positive. We've close contacted the 6 feet around them. Those students have been home. Someone has subsequently tested positive. And what we do is we have a conversation with them. Have you been to sporting events? Is there any potential for them to have been exposed outside of the classroom setting? If it's determined that there wasn't, that's when the Maricopa County Department of Public Health would deem that an outbreak.
Okay. And then when you say you're getting indications that quarantined individuals have turned positive more than last year's, because I think we said 0 almost last year, are those students self-quarantining, i.e. they had symptoms and said, I'm not feeling good and choosing to stay home, or were they contact traced and then placed into quarantine?
They were contact traced and placed into quarantine.
Okay. And then my final question is, I had asked you, Dr. Menzel, to kind of have some communication with regard to the triggers. You know, this recommendation is coming forth from the district. Based on what? And I mean, I know what it's based on, but I'm saying, when would it not be? I mean, are we going to, we were very in depth last year, almost to the point you were calling Dr. Sunshine daily and talking about our individual high school campuses and the numbers on there, et cetera. And we talked about the mitigation strategies all the time. So I just would like our community to understand from you, at what point, just to give some guidance, what are you looking at to make this recommendation? And what would you be looking at when you felt it was no longer necessary?
I appreciate the question. And I think the first thing is to come back to the primary point, and that is not only as a district, but the CDC and the recommendation to schools across the country is to prioritize in-person learning. That's first and foremost. We want to keep our schools open. So you remember the dashboard where we had high transmission, substantial, moderate, and low. And last year that was tied to learning models. So they recommended virtual, hybrid, or in person tied to those levels. Well, that's gone because the recommendation is we need to keep learning in person as much as we can. However, the transmission rate in our community, coupled with what's happening in our schools, is really still relevant to say, at what point can we begin to, we think about it as a dimmer switch. So you have more mitigation strategies when transmission levels are high and cases are increasing. As that trend begins to reverse itself, then you can slowly begin to make some modifications in terms of the mitigation strategies. You don't want to just turn it off automatically and then see a quick spike again. But I think about things in terms of, we've talked about this, the percent of people who are vaccinated, that lowers the risk. Right now, our elementary students are not eligible to be vaccinated. So we've got a group of students on our campuses that are more exposed to potential infection. And while I recognize that most don't get seriously ill, that's not all. And we've heard from pediatric doctors in the ICU here in the Valley that have talked about the cases that they're seeing increasing at worrisome rates with a limitation on beds. And you can't just take little people and put them in adult beds. Once the pediatric beds are full, they're full. And so there's a lot of concern on the part of the health professionals serving our kids because we're seeing more cases this way. So I think it's a combination of factors, but if that community transmission rate goes down, we're back into substantial or moderate again, that sort of changes the conversation. But right now, we're at a very high level of high transmission, and that's part of the challenge. So I do think that there's something to be said at looking at what's happening in the community, what are the other mitigation factors that we know are working, and then slowly removing some of those barriers. And we do recognize that masks are one of those things that are really difficult for people. And so this is, I hope, a short-term request, not a long-term one.
So jumping off that, just to tie this up, when you're telling our community what to look at, how does this look going forward? Does the board meet again in 3 months if the rates go down, or are you doing this? Or please give the optics here of what this might look like. Not COVID positive cases. I understand that you cannot be held to a very specific standard and date and all of that, but you're probably going to have a few people wondering, how long is this going to go on? The whole year if we stay here? So can you, or will you do it? Will the board, kind of vote it, please?
So I think a couple of things. One, because we have made a commitment, and I think that's universal here at this table, we're going to follow the law. So if the law on September 29th is that the mask mandate is prohibited, that'll go away. And then we'll see what happens in terms of where the Delta variant is and any other changes. I'm hoping that by that point in time, given some of what we've seen in other countries with the Delta variant, that it spikes quickly and then drops quickly, I'm hoping that we see something similar and that it really does become the short-term mitigation effort that leads to a longer-term sense of normalcy in our classrooms. I'm just as happy to see smiling kids' faces and smiling teachers' faces. That's what we all want. I also don't want to see kids sent home because we're following the Maricopa County Department of Health quarantine requirements. They're not ours. We've got an obligation to follow them. I don't want people to get COVID if we can avoid it, but I know some are going to. So it's the balancing act. So one is an operation of law. If that law remains in effect, the district's going to follow the law. I don't believe that there's any question about that. Secondly, if for some reason the law is invalidated, then we really have to take a look and say, okay, what did we experience? If the board were to move forward with a mask mandate tonight, we're still continuing to track our cases. If the trajectory doesn't change at all, that might tell us something. I think we have to look at all of the data points in terms of our experience in our schools. We said school by school last year because we didn't want to make universal decisions, because if the reality in one part of our district was different than another, we were not going to put a universal solution. All schools didn't have to go virtual if just one was a hotspot. I think we have to continue to look at that data specifically and then make those kinds of decisions. Right now, we're seeing worrisome cases across the district. And so I think that it's appropriate with the high level of community transmission to make this move. But I think as we head into September and things might be different, there's an opportunity to look at it on a school by school basis.
So just final comment on that. There's no absolute from a data driven conversation regarding these masks of when we may expect this, whether it's guidance from Arizona Department of Public Health, the Maricopa County, whatnot, moderate transmission. There's no specific guidance we're going to be using as our goal to get to where we would be having another conversation about removing masks.
There's nothing that the public health officials have provided that signals when they're going to change their recommendation. So we know what theirs is, and we've generally relied on that. At the same time, we are looking at our data, and we've had those direct conversations. We've said, here's what we're seeing. What do you think if we try this? And many times last year, the answer was, track the data, go ahead and try it, track the data, and see if you see any increases in cases or not. And if not, then keep doing it. But if you see something that signals a reverse in the trends and you have more cases starting to pop up, then stop what you did. So they've been really open to that experimentation to say, okay, what works, move slow so that you can, not end up with a flaming, outbreak again. But that's sort of how we've approached it last year.
Okay, thank you.
Board Member Hartwells.
Thank you. As a follow-up to one of Board Member Beckman's questions with respect to the kind of community transmission versus in-school transmission, one observation, Ms. Jennings provided us some data today on on-campus student positive cases, symptomatic, quarantining, all tied to on-campus transmission. Juxtaposition to those same categories, but for off-campus transmission. And I don't recall seeing this trend last year, but this year we have many more cases in the on-campus categories than we do the off-campus. And that's been true since the beginning of school, according to the data I'm looking at. And it's that was not observed last year that I recall. I think it's a very good point that to monitor the effectiveness, if we do proceed with reinstating a temporary mask requirement, to monitor if there is an impact and what these numbers are. But recall, these numbers that we're looking at are not because of infections from yesterday, right? These are incubation. There are incubation periods for these illnesses to manifest themselves. So what we need is at least a 2 to 3 week window to monitor the effectiveness or not. So I wanted to just follow up on that. I had a question though, if I may, on the keeping kids in school, that's the whole goal. And the mask and asymptomatic as a means for not quarantining. Can you drill down a little bit more on when the time point for asymptomatic would be? So the date that they are identified as a close contact, or as like I just said, it's an incubation period, as you and the nurses know. And I just want to say as an aside, Ms. Jennings and to all of the nurses who and the healthcare staff that are working in our schools, thank you. You are doing a hell of a job, and I thank you for that. We have this information because of you, and we need it to make informed decisions. So thank you. And back to you, Ms. Jennings, could you comment on what that asymptomatic, or Dr. Menzel, what would be the timestamp for when a student would be deemed asymptomatic and then cleared to not have to quarantine? Can we talk a little bit about that, please?
So Whitney, do you want to start?
So if I'm understanding your question, when it comes to an asymptomatic case, they, like if you're the individual who's tested positive, they would deem you basically, your quarantine would start the day your sample was collected because they don't have a symptomatic date to go off of. With regards to, I guess, quarantining the students around them, if the person who tests positive is asymptomatic, it sounds like you would not quarantine anybody in their circle, regardless of how close they might be. And I think that was sort of the question that was posed to Dr. Sonnenschein, and they weren't really on board with that necessarily at the time, but could change their mind.
Okay.
I think just to build on that, the close contact notice would go out, because if you're asymptomatic, you still have an obligation to monitor for symptoms. So it's an elevated sense of awareness, so loss of sense of taste or smell, running a fever, any of the other symptomatic pieces, there's an elevated monitoring period. There also could be consideration that, and in this case, we're still, if the mask mandate's in effect, that you would continue to wear the mask. I mean, so that helps reduce the risk if you're asymptomatic and then you later test positive, that you would not be spreading that, not as likely to spread it because you've already got that other mitigation strategy in place.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Are there any other board member questions or comments? Vice President Zanowski.
Yes, Dr. Menzel, you mentioned that the notice would still go out, which I think is great to keep that elevated monitoring process going. Would the phone calls still continue home from school administration and school nurses?
In terms of the contact tracing?
Yes.
We would still be doing all the contact tracing that we're doing now. That would not change this. We have to know where the potential exposures were. Now it changes in terms of if everyone's masked, that bubble shrinks, and so then you're going to probably notify less people. But if we were open to this idea that you don't have to automatically quarantine if everybody's masked, that's going to allow more healthy kids to stay in school.
That answered my question. Thank you.
Are there any further board member questions or comments? Again, included in our board materials for the evening was a draft directive. An entire section F deals with a number of the questions regarding who would make decisions on a day-to-day basis and how long they would last. Section 1 accounts for the fact that Dr. Menzel can essentially would pass it on to the superintendent and the administration, because the superintendent and the administration run the day-to-day schools. That is the proposal. Again, it is a draft proposal, and can end mask requirements or re-implement mask requirements as needed based on consultation with the County Department of Public Health. There are also provisions about the law as written, that all, assuming that the law were maintained as constitutional and a valid law, then no mask requirements could go beyond September 29th, 2021. And then there's provisions written in there in case the law is ruled unenforceable or unconstitutional before September 29th or after September 29th, and what the superintendent may do so that the governing board doesn't have to meet on this question multiple times throughout the year. That is in the draft proposal, but that can obviously be changed if the board votes in favor of amendment. Are there any questions or comments about that? This has been a very lively discussion, and I want to begin by thanking our community for taking the time to email the board over the past few weeks to share their experiences and concerns regarding COVID-19. Apologies, I received a message just now. Regarding COVID-19 mitigation strategies and in-person learning. And I can inform the public that although there was not a public comment tonight, probably because we would never finish the meeting, since Monday morning, the board has received over 300 emails regarding this topic of indoor masking requirements, including a petition containing 500 signatures of those in favor of student and staff mask requirements. So all of that information, along with the comments tonight about the time learning model, has given me, and no doubt my colleagues, a lot to consider. And I have weighed the various issues presented to me by our parents, community members, and staff. I have reviewed the data provided by the SUSD, the Maricopa County Department of Public Health, and CDC, as well as the emails we received, discussed this matter with healthcare personnel, and most recently, the public comments regarding the instructional time model. And based on that review, I've reached the following conclusions. First, I think it's a universal concept that we want our students in schools. I want our students in schools. In-person learning is the best form of education, both in terms of academics, extracurricular activities, social skills, and mental health. And being homesick from COVID-19 or closing schools and mass quarantining of students should be the exception, not the rule. Contracting COVID-19, school closures, and mass quarantines disrupt key services many students might otherwise receive, from lunch meals, social, physical, and mental health support, and before and after school programs. It is also extremely disruptive to learning, not only for those students in quarantine, but those still in person as well. We have seen the academic impact school closures have had on many of our children, as well as the quarantine practices. There's also an economic impact for families, including cost of childcare, lost wages if you have to stay at home to watch a child, or even loss of productivity for parents who are able to work at home. And in some instances, school closures and mass quarantines could leave children unsupervised, as we've heard tonight. And for some of our schools, and for some, our schools are the safest place for children to be during the day. Consequently, I believe that any lawful actions we can take in line with the CDC, AAP, AZDHS, and MCDPH recommendations to decrease the number of students who may contract COVID-19 in school or fall within the ambit of a close contact and require quarantine should be taken. These same considerations apply to our staff, without whom we cannot safely operate our facilities or educate our students or feed our children. Second, pediatric hospitalizations for COVID-19 have been increasing. And although I acknowledge the debate regarding the short-term and long-term danger COVID-19 poses to children, it is a fact that many of our students are not eligible for vaccinations at this time, cannot receive vaccinations for medical reasons. Vaccinated. The same is true for our staff. Our district's primary responsibility is to ensure the health and safety of our students and staff while on our campuses, and I believe we should do everything we legally can do to keep people safe. And third, it is my sincere hope, or was my sincere hope, that as vaccination rates rise and vaccines are made available to all age groups, infections will fall, the number of hospitalizations and deaths will decrease, and we can remove the mask requirements forever. I personally do not like wearing masks indoors, outdoors, or anywhere for that matter, and I was thrilled not to have to wear them this summer. Unfortunately, I acknowledge that the circumstances have changed with the new COVID-19 Delta variant, and I am just as disappointed as everyone else with having to wear a mask again indoors. But on the other hand, if wearing masks indoors is the difference between kids being in school or having to close classes or buildings and teaching students virtually, then I will support wearing masks indoors 100% of the time. So in my mind, I think we should not let the perfect be the enemy of the good and keep our students in school. And based on that review and based on these factors, I do support a mask requirement at this time for staff and students in line with the directive that has been drafted. So those are my thoughts on the matter. I don't know if we should be taking action to approve the directive as written, Dr. Menzel, or if you are just asking tonight that we approve a mask requirement, and if so, what date you would like that to take effect in order to give time to the administration to share that the remit of the mask requirements and what that will look like to our families and staff?
It would be at the discretion of the governing board in terms of whether or not you approve the directive or simply signal the direction. But from an administrative standpoint, we would need clarity on what the expectation of the governing board was and what the parameters were. We need, I would argue, at least a day until the 19th to be able to take whatever the governing board adopts tonight and formalize communication to our families to share with them what the next steps will be and how that will roll out. So we would need at least until the 19th, possibly the 20th, but the sooner the better, given the numbers that we're seeing. So I also don't think delaying too long helps us when we're seeing the kinds of increases that we're seeing.
Thank you. Do any board members or members of staff have any requested amendments to the Directive 01/2021? The reason I ask is that I feel that a directive, even with some amendments made tonight, would bring clarity to the board's direction if approved.
President Greenberg.
Board Member Hart-Wells.
Thank you. I too agree that a directive with four corners expressly stated in a document would be the best way to proceed, given time is of the essence here. So I would support proceeding with the directive as proposed.
Do any other board members or members of staff have any questions or comments or requested amendments to the directive as proposed? Dr. Menzel. Oh, apologies. Board Member Beckman and then Dr. Menzel.
Okay, so this is a little sideways since I would do this in my vote, but since you're talking about directives prior to the vote, I have to make my point known because it is about the draft itself. So first of all, thanks to my board members and leadership. I think ultimately all of us agree the best place for kids is in the classroom. And I think we all care enough about them to put a lot of time, passion, and energy into our thoughts tonight. Many community members, parents, students, and others have emailed. I want to thank them. I appreciate and take into consideration all the views, and I read every single email, even if I can't respond. I think most of us do. My entire family has chosen to be vaccinated, and we have no problem wearing masks, even though we all know we don't like them. All of us want children in school in person. However, I need to point out that in those communications, it became apparent to me that some children do have difficulty wearing masks. I've heard from many, including a mom concerned for her son because he wears hearing aids and glasses, and a mask for him is just too much. Another said she has to do breathing exercises and watch her heart rate because she gets claustrophobic and has panic attacks. Many districts, including Paradise Valley, are including opt-outs in their mask requirements to support students just like the ones I mentioned. Our parents shouldn't have to take the time and money to go to a doctor to prove that their children have some issues. Since the district's recommendation does not include an opt-out, I can't support it.
So board member Dr. Menzel, do you want to make a comment before response to board member Beckman's?
Well, I was going to ask for clarification on the close contact quarantine provision because it's silent here. I do think that if everyone is masked and asymptomatic and they don't have to quarantine, that will be something that helps keep as many kids in school as possible, while still allowing us to monitor for potential transmission. So it was not specifically addressed in the directive. It was discussed briefly, and it's okay if you want to be silent and give administration flexibility to pursue that. But I didn't, since it wasn't specifically addressed in the directive, I wanted to seek clarity there.
I think there are 2 points in the existing draft, and I will let other board members speak. In the existing draft, board member Beckman is correct. There is not a general opt-out offered to individuals for any reason, but there is the obviously food, beverages, educational activity, and medical exceptions. There's nothing in there that states that the medical reasons have to be signed off on by a doctor. I believe, in the case of a 504 IEP or other situation, that is the proof is the discussion between the family or the student and members of staff. So if there's a desire to create a broader opt-out, that is something that can be proposed. To Dr. Menzel's proposal for clarity on if everyone's wearing a mask and is asymptomatic, regardless of vaccine status, should they be allowed to, should we not follow the county health department recommendations? I'm a little, if I could receive some clarity, I've reviewed the CDC wording, and it seems to match the Maricopa County Department of Public Health in that the CDC merely reduces from 6 feet for assessing the close contact to 3 feet. It says who were within 3 to 6 feet as opposed to who were within 6 feet. Is the CDC and MCDPH not aligned on that assessment?
Now, those two are aligned. What we're seeing with a number of districts in the Valley is that they're taking a more expansive interpretation of that to say if everyone's masked, then unless you're symptomatic, you don't have to quarantine. So it's the trade-off of mask compliance versus lack of mask compliance, a lot more people missing a lot more time in school. And so it's going a little beyond what the guidance of the CDC is at this time, but it will keep more kids in school should they be exposed.
Thank you, Dr. Menzel. So we have 2 points raised. The one that just discussed on whether we should move beyond the MCDPH and CDC close contact analysis, and 2, whether we should add in a general opt-out. Board Member Hart-Wells, and then Vice President Sanowski.
Thank you. With respect to opt-out, that language, I don't like the language opt-out. What I'd like to understand is put some structure around the term opt-out. So if Board Member Beckman could clarify, the draft currently allows for educational exceptions and medical exceptions. And one question to Dr. Menzel, are those the exceptions that were implemented last year during the last school year? Are these the same?
Medical exceptions would be yes. Educational exceptions, it wasn't framed that way. So, for example, in the band case, we had masks with slits in them. So there were accommodations that were put in place. When kids were engaged in PE activities, for one point of the year, they were still wearing masks. At another, once they got outside, they weren't wearing masks. And so we made some of those shifts as the year progressed. This would allow us to really make real-time decisions in terms of those educational exceptions.
Okay, thank you for clarifying. So I would then ask Board Member Beckman if you could then clarify what exactly you're looking for that's broader than what is already provided for in terms of exceptions, please.
Well, what I feel like we've identified right now is not particularly defined. And when you use the word medical exception, that implies that someone's going to have to take their child, make a doctor's appointment, go there, prove to the doctor, get a doctor's note, come back and say, I shouldn't have to wear a mask. What I'm talking about is trusting our parents not to abuse the process and meet with their principal or the nurse and discuss their student with them, providing evidence of why it is not good for them in any way.
So the language now says medical reasons, for medical reasons, if provided proof of the need for an accommodation. And I'm understanding the accommodation language is related to the IDEA.
It could be broader than that. IDEA would be one, but think, and so I'd add 504. If a student's suffering from anxiety or they've got claustrophobic issues, those would not be covered under IDEA, but they could be covered under 504 and still would be relevant conditions to consider, I would think.
That child would have to have a 504 in place, correct?
Lori can weigh in. My thinking is if it's a 504 condition that's being discussed, that should be given some weight. And again, we don't want just to say any and all, because then the mandate's not, or the requirement's not a requirement, and we really are trying to reduce the potential risk and spread. But if there's a legitimate case, a conversation can be made, and we don't want to create artificial barriers to being able to get that accommodation. Lori.
So there's a bit of a difference between the IDEA and a 504. A child that's subject to the IDEA is a child that's on an IEP and has been determined to be eligible for special education services. A child with a 504 has a disability but is not in need of specially designed instruction. Both populations of students have a disability. You can have a disability that perhaps we would consider when we're looking at masks that don't fall under either of those provisions. Those provisions are about access and a free and appropriate public education, which, just by way of education, by the way, only applies in the realm of IDEA and 504. It is not a general right that is faint as we know it. Doesn't apply to all students, only those that are in our special populations. So when you're talking about a student, for example, Board Member Beckman, who has anxiety, but maybe that anxiety up until now hasn't interfered with their ability to access the curriculum, but putting a mask on them would. That's a conversation that could be had. I know that there are students who have had traumatic experiences for which a mask is a triggering experience. I think that it is reasonable to consider those on a case-by-case basis, and I believe that we had a form that was filled out that wasn't just the parent saying, I don't think a mask is good for my child, but included a little more information upon which we can make the staff, the people who knew the child the best, could make a decision as to whether that was appropriate for that child. But remember, when it comes to providing accommodation, it also has to be reasonable accommodation. And it's reasonable accommodation to accomplish the purpose of school, right? Which is educating students in a safe environment. So I understand what you're asking for. I think if we know that a student struggles, they already have an IEP or a 504, it certainly wouldn't make sense to require that parent to go to the doctor to provide additional documentation that we already have knowledge of. However, if we have no knowledge, then yes, I think we have to have something to start that conversation with to determine whether or not it's reasonable for that student, or by the way, that staff member, to be exempted from, because remember, no staff member is going to be on a 504 or an IEP. So I think we need some basis to start that conversation so that if you are going to move in the direction of a mask requirement, that you don't dilute your directive by having it such that anyone and everyone can opt out.
Yes, and I agree, and I thank you for that. So just to give a little more context to this, or a little more descriptor, personally, I'd kind of like to get away from the punitive feel of this and come back to the direction of we're trying to keep our kids safe, and we feel that this is a great mitigation factor, because it doesn't sit well with me when we say things like, where we imply our parents would abuse something like an opt-out. I know as being a parent myself, if it was required on our campuses, I would look at my girls, just because they don't like masks, I would say, you're fine, you can wear it, it's required. I certainly wouldn't abuse it. So I don't like to use language that implies our families would be doing that. What you're talking about, Lori, I appreciate. That's what I'm trying to get at. I'm not an attorney. I learned a long time ago, it's not good to try and play attorney. So you weighing in is good. What I'm looking for, I would hope to have before I would vote yes, is something to where a parent could come in and have a conversation, a very real conversation with whomever we deem appropriate, whether it's the principal, the nurse, whomever, and talk about their child specifically and why maybe this does not work for them. So how we can get to that, I don't know.
May I offer before we move, I know there are follow-up questions. I will actually allow Board Member Hartwells to follow up, then I will make a comment and move back to Vice President Sanowski, or actually to Board Member Lindsay. So Board Member Hartwells, I'll allow your follow-up, and then I have a suggestion on this directive.
Thank you. So I appreciate all of the robust conversation. I think that's very important to have. I am still a little confused as to what kind of opt-out provision would be amenable that is different than what is already in the directive as written. Again, I'm not being intentionally obtuse here. It's just that there was a process last school year that could be used. And I'm still failing to see the difference of what you are requesting here compared to what was implemented last year, and why that wouldn't work again this year for this temporary window, which I hope so much it is temporary. That is the goal here. So again, and I don't mean to harp on this, but I think this is very important. If you feel, and I'll just say, no one used the word abuse here, except for, so there is no, this is all about getting kids and keeping kids in school. We've heard numerous comments this evening from very emotional comments, and I empathize, and it hurts to hear those comments. I too am a parent, and I don't assume anyone thinks ill of me if my son's going to have to start wearing his mask, even though he should be wearing it and he's not doing it anyway. So I would like to really understand what happened last year to what you want to see this year that's so different, so I can understand what kind of language, and perhaps President Greenberg, that is where you're headed with some specific language. But I want to give you the opportunity, Board Member Beckman, if you could specifically describe what's that gap. What's the gap?
When I read the draft as it is, and when you say, not you specifically, but as I interpret it, it implies that medical, like as in, you know, it would be, a child would not be obligated to wear a mask or required to wear a mask if they had a valid medical reason to do so. I take that as I would have to have my doctor, therapist, whomever, prove that I was not able, or we talked earlier about couldn't put the mask or take the mask off myself, etc. Some very defined reasons that were substantiated with evidence from the medical profession of why I should not be held to this requirement. And I am saying I would like to see that looser in the form of an opt-out where there's no medical or therapist documentation provided. It is a conversation and a determination given by a principal, a nurse, etc., to determine whether, yes, they should have an opt-out. And again, I'm not playing attorney. I'm open to this. I'm just saying I think it's very stringent right now with the term medical. It's not really an opt-out. We can't discriminate. If someone can't do it medically, we couldn't hold them to it. So.
May I propose a change then on that paragraph E? If we retitled it medical, comma, other accommodations, and rewrote it to state the following: a student or staff member, and in fact, actually, I will copy and paste this into the chat box just so that we're not relying just on what I'm reading. But a student or staff member may request a medical or other reasonable accommodation from the requirements of this directive. The superintendent shall establish a process for applying for, evaluating, and implementing medical or other reasonable accommodations. since Lori Burr did mention that we did have a form that we used in the past, so I feel that in the next few days that would be possible. I cite the superintendent here just because the superintendent is ultimately responsible, but we can say the superintendent or superintendent's designee, however we want to phrase it. But would this verbiage be closer to something that would be acceptable to Board Member Beckman?
Yeah.
Dr. Menzel, Lori, do you have any comments on that language that has just been shared in the chat box?
I do not. I think the language is fine.
Is this executive session legal advice you're seeking, President Greenberg?
I'm not seeking legal advice. I'm seeking, I'm not asking you to tell me whether it's legally permissible, but do you have any changes if you see something that needs to be changed? Or recommendations?
I think developing a process for applying for and evaluating, I'm always, I always like precise language. That's how some people think. But I think this would capture the conversation that we have been having.
Do any other board members have questions or comments about this specific amendment? With that said, there is the outstanding matter about changing the close contact definition our district uses. Are there any comments or questions about that? I apologize. You know what? I've skipped some comments, and I don't know if I've addressed them all. Board Member Lindsay and then Vice President Sanowski. I apologize for that oversight.
Well, Dr. Menzel, I know you talked to the Madison superintendent. Can you speak to how their opt-out went when they gave parents a chance to sign that?
Yes. So in Madison, 6.5% of the parents signed the opt-out. 5% of staff filled out that opt-out form.
And anybody could have signed
it. Initially, anyone could sign it. As of, I think, last Friday, now it's only for medical exceptions. But at the beginning, it was open to anyone.
But the people who signed it before, they get to continue?
Yes.
So
and for staff, it has changed so that there's an expectation in the district that if you're 6 feet or more away from students, then you don't have to wear a mask. But if you're closer to students than 6 feet, then put the mask on as a protective measure. And so it's kind of a balancing act with respect to staff and students to mitigate risk.
And then I know you spoke with the Paradise Valley superintendent. What is their opt-out like?
As I understand it from the conversation today, it's similar to their vaccination. So people can, there's a religious exemption, there's a medical, and then there's a personal. So they had, I think, those three. They use similar language to what they already have in their regulations.
So do you think that the hope for PV is by doing their opt-out, but enticing people with if you're wearing your mask and close contacts are wearing their mask, the close contacts don't have to quarantine?
I would say that across the board, all of us, in terms of superintendent leaders who had the conversation today, want to keep our kids in school. We also don't want to see kids getting sick and staff getting sick, and then this domino effect just because of how quickly the virus gets transmitted from one person to another. So we're all trying to find that balancing act so that we don't have to close classrooms. So far, some of my colleagues in the North Valley have had to actually close full classrooms. We've not had to yet, but we're really close in a couple of instances, way too close. And that's what we're trying to avoid. And so if getting more people to wear a mask by saying if they're all wearing masks, then asymptomatic can keep coming to school, that might be a trade-off that's worth seeing if it works. it may not work. If it doesn't work, then I think we need to go back and say, well, that wasn't successful. But it certainly seems like something worth considering to me.
Yeah, I mean, I just, in the verbiage reasonable accommodation, you are going to have a lot of parents coming to the school and stating their case for a reasonable accommodation. So who is really the one that's going to decipher what's reasonable and what's not?
Well, Lori, is there a legal definition of reasonable here? You're muted.
Holy cow. Sorry about that. I apologize. You would think I would know. Usually the term reasonable accommodation does have a legal connotation when you're talking about exemptions to things and you're talking in the world of disability and exceptions. So a reasonable accommodation is almost universally in this context linked to some verifiable reason that prevents the person from accessing or performing the task because of whatever the requirement is. So it's not, typically it would not be, my child is uncomfortable, my child doesn't like wearing a mask. That wouldn't necessarily be deemed reasonable given the purpose for which we would be requiring masks for. If you wanted to define that language, you would define it, I would think, in your process for applying and evaluating and implementing these particular things. But it does typically have a specific connotation that isn't just, I'd prefer not to.
And can I run a hypothetical by you as a way of kind of fleshing that out a little bit? So I can see a request where it might be, I just don't like to wear masks, or I don't believe in wearing masks. That could be one thing. But I've had parents, and you've seen the emails, indicate, you know, my child is crying and not wanting to go to school at all. The mental health aspect of what this does to some people, and there is a real mental health issue that is a concern, and I wouldn't want to ignore that. Because we know that across the board, the pandemic in all of its shades has had an impact on the social emotional well-being of our kids and of our staff. And I want to be sensitive to that, because sometimes we go to the hard part of a medical piece. So I've got a breathing difficulty or I've got something else. Mental health is also important, and it's a little more difficult to identify how that looks and feels. But to me, that's where I think there might be a difference between the I just don't want to and my kid won't get out of bed in the morning because, you know, after a week of having to do this, they just can't do it anymore. And so I don't know how that fits in this.
And if I could add, do I have permission to add, President Greenberg?
Of course.
Reasonable accommodation doesn't necessarily mean that the staff or the student will not be required to mask. Reasonable accommodation can mean a variety of things that are used to help the student or the staff accomplish the purpose for which we may or may not put this directive in place. So again, it is a larger conversation about how to accomplish the purposes of the district, and also being sensitive to the individual needs of the student who needs to enter our what's called public accommodation, right? Who needs to enter our schools. And again, that would go for both staff and students if this is an across the board directive that applies to all. So it's not just yes mask or no mask. It could also mean other things as well.
Yeah, I'm just put in a tough spot. I mean, Dr. Menzel, you know, I talk to site leaders, not all of them, but some of them, and they have pleaded with me that with the 29th hanging over our heads, that please don't do a full-fledged mask mandate, because they don't want to get into possible, confrontations with parents and arguments and trying to navigate that when they have everything else on their plate. And so they've pleaded, like, if you're going to do it, you have to give me a tool, an opt-out tool, so I don't have to deal with those situations potentially. So it's just put me in a difficult spot.
I would think that a trade-off here is that in an opt-out situation, if the person is a close contact and they were unmasked, then we've got to follow the quarantine guidance from the Maricopa County Department of Public Health. I think that's the way you protect everybody else in that environment, if they are sitting next to someone who was COVID positive and they were unmasked.
Board Member Hartwells. Oh, sorry, Vice President Sanowski, then Board Member Hartwells. Apologies.
No problem. Really just a comment, because my questions and concerns were addressed, but I want to reiterate a little bit of what Board Member Lindsay had talked about, and that was the impact that this could potentially have, or the burden this could potentially have on our site leaders, also our school nurses. I'm also very aware that a lot of our school nurses and school counselors are familiar with students' unique needs. And so I think without further burdening them, they can become part of this process and conversation in determining those reasonable accommodations that have already been put in place. I have a concern with that term reasonable. I think it can be overused, and therefore, if that's the case, why have this mask recommendation in place? Why put this in place if we're going to be giving people the opportunity to say, Dr. Menzel, I really respect when you said there's a balancing act here, because I really do not want us to be in a situation where people say, this is not comfortable for me, or my child doesn't like this, when, as parents, we know that we have to have conversations with our kids to help coach them through things that are uncomfortable and challenges. And that is a big, hard lift for parents. I understand that. But I see that's, we have to be working as teammates here. And we can't be working together to try to get through this worldwide health pandemic if we are going to make exceptions of why I don't want to wear a mask on campus. And so I think if we're going to really put an emphasis on the purposes to make sure that kids are showing up for class and teachers are able to have that best instruction opportunity with kids, that we need to make this as clear-cut as we can, and without further burdening our administrators, our site administrators, who might just go, I don't want to deal with this, and whoever wants it can have it, because then on that campus, how valid is this process and our presumed outcome of what we all want? If therefore now we have to have kids in quarantine for close contact. If kids are going to be in masks, and we can give with if they're in masks and they're in close contact, yes, send a message home, let them know, but they may not have to quarantine. I think that is the smart way to go about this. And of course, case by case basis, but I do think our professionals on our campuses are very aware of a lot of the students' needs. So I would trust their opinion. Dr. Menzel, I would trust your opinion, and councils, as well as Board President Greenberg's, and working together to put this so it's T's are crossed and I's are dotted. I mean, I trust that this can be done so that it does what we intend it to do. And I do want to comment too that we are displaying our vision statement here. We are able to have conversations late into the evening after long days and do so in a respectful manner. And I think we are setting the example that I really hope that our community sees and understands is the method, a preferable method to always be communicating with one another, whether we agree with them or not. So thank you to all of you for this very respectful conversation, and that's it.
Thank you. Board Member Hartwells.
Yeah, I wanted to just remind us of why we're doing this. I feel like we're getting a little afield of the goal, which is, one, this virus is virulent. It wasn't as virulent last year. Two, it is airborne. It is airborne transmission. So if we start carving up to appease certain scenarios that may or may not happen, I don't think that it will be as effective as we need it to be. Again, these numbers, 10%, are going to increase even with a mask requirement. So I appreciate that this is hard. My hope is that individual-based decisions and community-based decisions would overlap and be synergistic in a constructive way. That may not happen every time, but again, we've done this. We did this last school year. This is not unprecedented. The students, by and large, what I observed, were compliant. So I don't know that we need to start slicing and dicing up exceptions to prepare for that which we don't know will happen, one. And two, we didn't encounter last year. So I'm going to leave it at that. But I would just make sure we continue to stay focused on the overarching goal. And I also would like for us to have a substantive discussion on the close contact and the quarantining where all parties involved are masked. It could be an incentive to wear the mask and not try to, find an exception or not increase the whole of the exceptions, but rather incentivize the type of, mitigation that we have seen does have some impact and has been used for centuries. So if we could, I'm not sure if we're done with the exceptions or not, but I really would like, it is getting late and I really want to make sure we nail down whether we're comfortable with adding a proviso on quarantining that is a little bit different than what the public health guidance looks like.
Thank you, Board Member Beckman. And then I will provide commentary on that issue.
Okay. Yeah, and I'll try and be quick. I thought this might just give them some context. I wanted to pull up what Paradise Valley did today in case you all didn't have it, just so you were aware as we were having this very similar conversation. Our goal is to maintain in-person learning in a safe environment for all students and staff. Teaching and learning in a mask is not easy or ideal. Masks pose challenges in the classroom. However, MCDPHH quarantines causes even larger disruptions that defeat our goal of keeping in-person learning. When a COVID-19 positive and close contact are both wearing a mask, quarantine is not required. Therefore, PV Schools will update its mitigation plan requiring face masks for students, staff, and visitors while indoors at all school sites through September 28th of 21. There will be a limited opt-out option for students and staff. Face masks remain strongly recommended while on PV Schools properties. You may opt out your child out of this requirement by contacting your school's office to obtain the necessary form. So that's what they're doing in our neighboring district. Vice President Janowski, thank you for your comments, but I have to say, very much appreciated and respectfully, the one part where you said you were concerned about parents opting out for any reason and then the principals having more on their plate, so they're going just do it. That's what I'm worried. I don't think that's going to happen, as evidenced by Madison's numbers, and we may just agree to disagree on that. I think we will have parents be respectful. I know I would be. So, and I don't want to add any more to our leadership's plates either. I don't want them to be in the crosshairs of parents. I don't want them to have to be in a parking lot, you know, explaining rules. So that's why I had this discussion, and I'll just leave it with that.
Thank you. As I noted earlier in my comments, I would rather not let the perfect be the enemy of the good. On the question of quarantine, changing the close contact definition, my position has been the same throughout this, that we should follow to the greatest extent possible the CDC, AZDHS, and MCDPH recommendations. That said, I have drafted an option for the board to consider so that we can pass the buck here and allow the superintendent to modify, which I think is important anyways, but not only modify the guidelines set out in the, you know, mask mandate, because again, the directive states, you know, you have to wear a mask when you're indoors and you're in the same room as one or more individuals. So perhaps the superintendent may wish to change that at some point, or change the rule on visitors, or change the rule on educational exceptions or medical or other accommodations. So the proposal here would be, one, to specifically allow an amendment that would allow the superintendent to modify those provisions of the directive as necessary, as well as modify mandatory quarantine requirements implemented by the CDC, AZDHS, and MCDPH. I don't know how people feel about that. And I've added it to the chat box. Sorry.
President Greenberg.
Board Member Hartwells.
So I believe the person that should react is Dr. Menzel, since it effectively, it does defer to you, and it does bestow on you the authority to make those decisions without going back to the board, which I would like your reaction to, please.
I'm still processing. There are pros and cons to the proposal that's in front of us here. One, it just shifts where all of the pressure comes that people don't like the decision that's made. That's okay. I get hired to be in this position to help lead a district forward. And what we know in this environment is that there are always going to be somebody who's not happy with the decision that's made. I prefer when we can reach consensus as a governing board and superintendent on how we're going to move together. That being said, what I like, but I would love some bumpers on, is the ability, and I think we captured it in the effective date, duration, termination piece, that it still needs to be in consultation with public health officials. So like I said earlier, there were times last year when I had an idea, I talked with Dr. Sonnenschein, I said, what about if we did this? She said, well, if you do that and collect data to see if you see any difference, then go ahead and try that, because there's some things we just don't know. So it created an environment for us to try some things out, but measure it so that we could see what the impact was instead of an all or nothing approach. I think it's still really important not to run so far afield from public health guidance that there's no semblance of structure, because I'm not the epidemiologist, nor am I a medical professional. I do believe that kids need to be in school as best we can, and we need to provide a safe and healthy learning environment to the extent possible. Can't eliminate all illness, but we do want to eliminate the spread of communicable diseases. We have parameters around other communicable diseases, and last I checked, there aren't parents who think just because someone has head lice, they have a fundamental right to be in school, right? Those kids are excluded for head lice, and that's not got the same consequences as COVID. So I think that there still needs to be a provision here that says in consultation with, but allows some flexibility to try some things out and see what the impact is. So that would be my initial reaction.
Thank you. I appreciate that, and I think that's good advice. You have been very good about consulting with the Maricopa County Department of Public Health and taking their guidance and heeding their guidance, and I think that's been a very healthy and productive collaboration for the district. So I'm glad you forged that relationship. I will stop there and let my colleagues proceed.
Do any other board members have any questions or comments or requested modifications to this new provision? I will say that that's fine. I've added that in here. I'll repost with Dr. Menzola's position. I think it is important to give you, since you run the day-to-day aspect of the district, to give the administration the ability to make modifications if something is not working, or if we do need to change things, either after consultation with the Maricopa County Department of Public Health. I don't want to pass the buck. That was a joke. That wasn't that wasn't a desire, but I am cognizant of the fact that there may be a desire to modify the quarantine guidelines, and then if it doesn't work out, to bring them back in. And if the board has to constantly come back and vote on that, it's just going to take up our time when we do have a lot of work, academic work, and extracurricular work we need to focus on in our district, special education services and the like. So I think some freedom there with consultation allows you to do what you might want to try out. One of the reasons I will just note that I'm hesitant is that if there have been some cases where students have contracted COVID while on campus and were quarantined and developed in quarantine, that would essentially, we could end up almost doubling the amount of people required to quarantine in a assuming the law stays in place after August 19th. If our position is we are modifying this in hopes to protect public safety, but also encourage continued voluntary mask use, you may run into that issue. But otherwise, I think those are the two amendments: the modification provision and the amendment to the medical and other accommodations. Are there? I do see that the effective date is August 19th. Given the work that needs to be done, would you rather that be changed to August 20th, Dr. Menzel? I think that would be helpful. If we get it done sooner, that would be great, but it gives us time to actually put flesh on the bones tomorrow and communicate to our families. And I know that advance notification is appreciated by our families and by our school administrators and by our teachers, by everyone in the system. I see there's a new message. Board Member Beckman.
Just a simple housekeeping thing. We have a lot of community members watching this meeting if they've stayed up this late. They have not seen this draft. Could you please give a summary of what we are discussing and asking Dr. Menzel to do, because they probably have no idea right now. Am I able to share my screen? Or even verbally establish what we're what this is leaning towards. Yes, Jonathan, how do I do that? I think it'll just be, I think it's a good point. I think just for the purposes of doing this properly. Oh, here, share content.
Arrow up.
Open system preferences. Sorry, give me 1 second here. Screen recording. Lock. Sorry. All right, and then Teams. I would have to quit and reopen, of course, because nothing can be easy here. So I will read it out, or I can drop the file in the chat. Give me 1 second here. That is what I will do. Sorry about this, folks. Well, that isn't classic. There we go. Sorry about that. If with the public, please ignore for the public's note that my brother originally set up my Microsoft Word. So my brother's name is Mark Greenberg. That is why it says Mark Greenberg as opposed to my name, Jan Michael Greenberg, just so that
Everyone knows there's not a ghost typing for me. Thank you, Jonathan. So that is the red line version with the changes. You'll see paragraph E has been amended, paragraph F has been added, and then paragraph G1 has been changed to have an effective date of August 20th. And Dr. Menzel, of course, can implement it earlier under the modification provision if it's ready earlier. Are we ready to proceed to a roll call vote?
President Greenberg, that was my request earlier because I had my comment to make, but should you just want to go for a vote at this time, it's up to you.
Thank you. Is there any desire to have a roll call vote at this time? Okay, the chair moves to approve action item 4A, discussion and consideration of instituting a mask requirement, the implementation of Directive 01/2021 as amended. Is there a second?
Second.
Board Member Hartwell's seconds. It is moved and seconded that the board approve action item 4A, discussion and consideration of instituting a mask requirement, Directive 01/2021 as amended. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those
Aye.
opposed say no.
No.
The motion passes 4-1. Board Member Lindsay voting no. The board will now move to agenda item 5A, adjournment of special meeting. The chair moves to adjourn this special meeting of the Scottsdale Unified Number 48 Governing Board on August 17th, 2021 at 10:45 p.m. Is there a second?
Second.
Board Member Hartwell seconds. It is moved and seconded that the board adjourn this special meeting of the Scottsdale Unified Number 48 Governing Board at on August 17th, 2021 at 10:45 p.m. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed say no. The motion carries 5-0 and the meeting is adjourned. The time is 10:45 p.m.